So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you had some rest. And now we have another 3 hours of our meeting, but only 3 hours, please. We are coming to the item 5C, report on the evaluation by the Internal Oversight Service of UNESCO's standard-setting work of the culture sector and the related audit of the working methods of cultural conventions. We have examined the committee's report to the General Assembly and the Secretariat's reports on its activities, and now we turn to an important item that concerns how our convention looks in the eyes of others. We have allotted a generous time slot to this item, given its importance in helping to chart the future direction of the convention. There may be some important issues that cannot be fully resolved this afternoon, or that figure into our agenda at a specific point later in this week. Nevertheless, I hope that we will find broad consensus over a number of issues, bracketing some of those that may be a little more difficult and require time for states to come up with the durable solutions that can attract a full consensus. This item has two parts. First is the evaluation by UNESCO's International Oversight Services, OIC, of the impact and the effectiveness of the 2003 Convention. You have the executive summary of the evaluation as Annex 1 to document 5C, and the entire evaluation constitutes document 8.com-inf.5.c. Second is the audit by IOS of the working methods of all the cultural conventions. The audit is found as Annex 2 to the document 5C. These studies are complementary, but they have different aims and call for different responses for them. I propose to proceed as follows. First, we will hear an introduction to the evaluation from the Director of IOS. Then, will be followed by the general debate on the evaluation, for which I propose the limit. We will have to have some limit for the time of this debate. I think within 1 hour somewhere. I will then invite the Director of IOS to introduce the audit, followed by a second general debate that can probably be much shorter, since the audit calls for fewer actions. Then we will turn to the adoption of the first draft decision, 8.com-5.s.1, which concerns the evaluation. I think there are many recommendations that are not controversial, and we will try to make as much progress as we can on those. We can suspend debate if necessary on certain paragraphs that may require more thought and discussions, for example, for a little bit longer time, and we can do it then in the coming days. Then we will conclude with the adoption of the second draft decision, 8.com-5.c.2, which concerns the audit. Here too, if there are specific paragraphs that do not easily find any consensus, we can bracket them for further debate during the week. Without further ado, then, let me invite the Director of the International Oversight Service, Mr. Bernd Kaupens, to introduce the first part of our work. I'm sorry, maybe I'm pronouncing not correctly. Mr. Kaupens, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you also for the host country. Dear distinguished delegates, it is a pleasure to introduce first the evaluation of the 2003 Convention and later, after debate, the audit of the working methods, both conducted by the Internal Oversight Service of UNESCO, or IOS. I have a number of slides to present to you, and it will be a pleasure to go over the highlights of the evaluation with you. If I could have the next slide, please. This evaluation is part of a wider exercise by IOS, which covers the standard setting work of the culture sector. Part one of this exercise includes the evaluation of this convention and also the audit of the working methods of all conventions in the culture sector, which we will discuss later. The final report is scheduled to be presented to the Executive Board of UNESCO in the spring of 2014. Next slide, please. The focus of this evaluation was to try to demonstrate the impact, including the impact at the policy and legislation level, and to verify the overall implementation at a national level, and also to study and try to identify the effectiveness of UNESCO support. We found this particularly relevant because a large part of UNESCO, and especially of the culture sector, deals with conventions. And it's sometimes hard for our stakeholders, our donors, the public, and ultimately the taxpayers to understand the value of UNESCO's role in conventions. I am pleased to report that UNESCO is a lead agency in the UN to try to demonstrate the impact of normative work through evaluations. This is also a good time to indicate our appreciation for the contribution from Flanders for their generous support to co-fund, together with IOS, this exercise. And I would also like to thank many state parties, member states, NGOs, etc., who have participated in this important exercise through either interviews, surveys, etc. Our methodology, in simple terms, what we wanted to do was to find out whether this convention matters and how it works in practice. And our methodology consisted of a combination of desk studies of periodic reports, extensive and intensive interviews, more than 125 people were interviewed, and a questionnaires to state parties with what I would call a high response rate of almost half of all state parties responded, and somewhat over half of NGOs responded to our request. We also try to, since there is no agreed methodology in evaluation on how to do this, we experimented with constructing a theory of change model for this convention, where we went from initial dialogue to ratification of the convention, to legislation, to the policies following this legislation, and finally to the implementation of these policies. Next slide, please. What are the key findings? We found that the convention is a highly relevant international legal instrument, relevant to national and local priorities, and to the needs of the concerned communities, groups, and individuals. The convention, while relatively young, also triggered an international discourse and academic dialogue, broadening the definition and meaning of cultural heritage. The evaluation demonstrated also the important link between culture, especially intangible cultural heritage, and development. But more work is needed in this specific area, and we would love to do more work in this area. Likewise, a gender dimension was identified, and it would also be important to continue to try to demonstrate the importance of the gender dimension. We also noted and found that many state parties have integrated the Convention's provision into cultural policies and laws, which was the objective. This is already an important finding when looking for the first level of impact. The next slide, please. We also found that there are many challenges, or a number of challenges. For instance, many governments lack financial and human resources to successfully implement this convention, despite an important capacity building program. We also found that understanding the concept of the convention remains a challenge by governments as well as by civil society, and often community participation remains a challenge. Finally, as an intermediate finding, UNESCO's extensive worldwide capacity building program with a large network of qualified experts was thought to be highly appreciated and considered by many as a very important component. Next slide, please. We found that the representative list is important and has contributed significantly to the visibility, but we also found that its relative importance is perhaps overrated. And the list in need of urgent safeguarding, the Register of Best Safeguarding Practices and International Assistance, is perhaps underutilized. We also found that the evaluation of nomination files by two separate bodies, raises questions of the standards that are being used, and also raises potential conflicts of interest. We also noted the role of NGOs, the important role of NGOs, but we also found that this important role could be improved or enhanced. Next slide, please. Finally, on some other findings, we found that the convention lacks what we would call a theory of change and an overall results framework with objectives, timeframes, indicators, and benchmarks. It is therefore, because of the lack of this, difficult to capture and demonstrate results. A theory of change is simply a causal chain of events where one event triggers another one, and one tries to build links and demonstrate the impact on one or the other. As I said, in this convention, we looked first at the ratification, step 2 at the legislation, step 3 at the policies, and step 4 at the implementation of these policies. Finally, on the findings of this evaluation, and this must be acknowledged, we found that the work of the Secretariat was of high quality, consistently high quality. And let me say this again, because it's important. We noted that there is an important disconnect between on the one hand, the resources, and on the other hand, the demand for services in the Secretariat. And this is an important point that we will need to address. On the last slide, we have a number of recommendations, 24 recommendations, which I will not discuss individually, but the first 5 of these recommendations focus on the national implementation and cover issues of gender, NGO involvement, and policy development. Next 2 recommendations focus on capacity building programs. The 8th to the 14th recommendations deal with the Convention's mechanisms for international cooperation, the list, Register of International Assistance, and achieving the proper balance amongst them. Recommendations 15 and 16 refer to cooperation with other conventions and intergovernmental bodies. The next 3 recommendations focus on NGOs, civil society, and the private sector, and how they can contribute most effectively to intangible cultural heritage safeguarding. And one recommendation, the final one, calls for strengthening information sharing. Sorry, that's not the final one. There are the 4 last ones call for reinforcing the Convention's monitoring and evaluation framework so that impact can continue to be demonstrated. Let me stop here, Chairman. Thank you for this opportunity to present our findings, and I look forward to a constructive exchange and debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kuipens. Looking through the document and listening to you, I felt certain satisfaction that we are on correct way, as if we are at the doctor's office, examined our all check-up results, and the doctor says that you are okay, you can live and go further. But there are minor things that may cause difficulties in the future, so you must take care, you must keep you in shape. So I think that we have to find out these weak points and go further with the evaluation which will bring us for the better activity. And especially I'm pleased to hear the positive view about the work of the Secretariat of the Convention, which is really the matter which touches all of us, and we are daily working on this basis. Dear committee members, I propose to start some kind of discussion, general debate on the evaluation. Some of the issues will also be raised and reinforced when we turn later to the audit. But I would like us to focus our discussions now on the findings and recommendations of the evaluation. I think that all of us had read and looked through all this document in full scale. So I think that you have some ideas which will be very positive. If you don't mind, I will apply some time schedule, no more than 3-4 minutes, for example, for the discussion, if you don't mind. Okay, so I'm ready to give the floor. Nicaragua, first whom I saw.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Como es la primera vez que hago uso de la palabra, quería agradecer al gobierno de Azerbaiyán por la magnífica recepción que nos han dado. En segundo lugar, yo quería agradecer al secretariado por permitirnos contar con documentos que efectivamente nos sirven para realizar mejor nuestro trabajo de cara a la convención tan importante pues que tenemos enfrente. Yo quería hacer algunos comentarios. En primer lugar, luego de reafirmar el agradecimiento que siento pues por los documentos que se nos han presentado, no me queda muy claro del documento eso que denomina el auditor interno como una falta y una teoría del cambio y un modelo teórico del cambio. La verdad es que la convención está práctica, es clara. En ese sentido no creo que pueda haber pues, ese concepto de teoría del cambio para una convención tan específica y concreta como esta. Realmente no lo entiendo, pues, y no me parece que sea la manera más apropiada de enfocar cómo es que tenemos que hacer nuestro trabajo. En segundo lugar, ellos hablan de que unas convenciones son más atractivas que otras, etcétera, como que si se tratara de qué producto vas a vender mejor. La verdad es que hay partes de nuestra convención que son mucho más, que tienen, digamos, un mayor valor por parte de los estados, pero eso no quiere decir que si no hay el número igual, 100, 200, 500 de cada una de las diferentes áreas, no significa que eso sea, digamos, incongruente. De tal manera que me parece sí que es muy importante el hecho de la recomendación que se hace con relación a reforzar el seguimiento a las actividades de la convención. Eso es una práctica cotidiana y concreta. Llamó la atención el hecho de que este es un ejercicio correcto que se hace desde el punto de vista interno, ¿verdad? Yo creo que los estados podríamos también participar en un proceso de evaluación y recibir un informe de las actividades, no únicamente Voy a dejarlo aquí por razones de tiempo, pero me reservo la posibilidad de volver a intervenir cuando vayamos a ver el tema de las recomendaciones. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much. Next floor is Belgium, please. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to make some general comments and then pass the floor to my colleague for some more detailed remarks. Well, we want to thank, of course, Mr. Kuppens, Director of iOS, for the fantastic work that they did with this evaluation. I must say, when I first noted this in the work plan of iOS, I thought it would be mission impossible. But, well, it proved to be a mission possible and mission very well done, and I think even better than Tom Cruise itself could have done it. So, thank you very much. It's great work. And also, if we look at the results of the evaluation, what came forward of the evaluation, it's quite positive also for our convention. We note indeed with great satisfaction that the convention proved to be a relevant international, highly relevant international instrument, and that it really attributes it to the broadening of the international discourse and the meaning of international cultural heritage. But it also highlighted some challenges, and I won't go into all of them, but I want to stress three of them that are of particular importance to our delegation. First of all is, of course, capacity building. It was mentioned here. It is clear from the periodic reports, it is clear throughout our work that more work needs to be done on the institutional and all the dimension of the capacity building work within the strategy that we have. Second point, and I think this is maybe the most important, is community participation. This is also an issue that is clear in the work and the documents that we will treat later on, that this community participation that is at the heart of this convention deserves our utmost attention, and even more so than now. And the third aspect that I want to highlight are the linkages with other conventions and other organizations. I will finish just with two observations. First of all, the issue of the consultative and the subsidiary organ. Please allow me to take you back in time very briefly. As you know, we had a decision in 2011 at the committee to enlarge the mandate, the recommendation to the GA to enlarge the mandate of the consultative body. Then we had the discussions in the GA. Some delegations were in favor of this enlarging. Others said, no, let's wait a little more and let's take some time to evaluate. We had some time. We also have this evaluation, and I read it attentively, and I saw that one of the findings of the evaluation really comes back to a point that was raised during the GA, and this is the point of consistency and the point of coherence. During the GA, it was said that we have the two criteria for example, representative and urgent safeguarding. The both sets of which some of them are identical, and you can have a possible problem of coherence in the interpretation of these two sets of criteria if it's done by different bodies. Of course, you can also have a conflict of interest with some countries being in the subsidiary organ and the committee. I think this is also highlighted in the audit of iOS. The second point was mentioned by some of the other delegations, the theory of change. I think it's a good thing. Of course, in the evaluation, it was something that was drafted up. It was a working model, I think. And if we develop this further, I think it's important that we give responsibility to states parties and to the GA in the development of this results-based framework. And now, with your indulgence, I will briefly pass the floor to my colleague.
Thank you. I would also like to congratulate the authors of this report. I want to make a brief comment on that theory of change. If you take a look at the scheme on page 16 of the theory of change, there are first a minor remark. There's a systematic mentioning of community participation. In the convention, we systematically speak about communities, groups, and individuals, and we should not forget that small differentiation. The second one is that if I take a look at the theory of change, what is still missing and could develop are feedback loops, because the position is that the convention text is stable and cannot change, but the operational directives, they can change. And if you take a look at the scheme, the operational directives are not mentioned, even not in the second category. And if you take a look at the position of the Intergovernmental Committee and the General Assembly, they should be more to the left, outside the scheme, because actually they can change the operational directives and make this theory and the basis evolve. So I think we should develop this theory of change into theory of change and development, and put in the role of the operation directives and how they can evolve in the whole system. Because what will we do in the end is to make a conclusion out of this report is to change the operational directives. So we think that the theory could be developed to include this evolving part, which has an effect on objective time frames, indicators, and so on, because they move and can change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The floor is given to Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the outset, allow me to thank you and the government of Azerbaijan for your kind hospitality. Concerning the document in front of us, in general terms, Brazil goes in line with most of the recommendations of IOS. We'd like to congratulate our IOS for the job well done. It's a very comprehensive study that we enjoyed reading it, and we share most of the findings. And also would like to express our gratitude to Belgium by the government of Flanders to also co-finance in this document. At this stage, I think Mr. Chairman, I think it would be perhaps better if we could discuss recommendation by recommendation once we arrive to the draft decision. But just in general terms, I would like to pose some questions at this stage, because the recommendations here are addressed sometimes to state parties, sometimes to the committee, to the General Assembly, and many times to the Secretariat. So there is so it's somehow difficult to understand who is going to implement what, and this perhaps is clearer when we come to the draft decision. We'd like to pose the following questions here. Concerning recommendation 9, we want to better understand how this clarification of the representative list could be done, and how would this be implemented. This is something that we do share the concern, but we have some difficulty to understand how this recommendation could be implemented. And we also would like to express our reservation with regards to recommendation 11, even though we would favor having one body to deal with the different mechanisms in the convention. We are not altogether sure if there is only one way forward, which is suspending the subsidiary body. Perhaps we could be creative enough to have perhaps a middle ground solution. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to give the floor to China, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. China would like to join the other previous delegations in welcoming the evaluation by IOS. We believe that the evaluation findings help us to understand better and get a full spectrum on how the cultural conventions are going, especially the 2003 convention, as it is the first such evaluation of the impact and effectiveness of the convention. We deeply appreciate the informative observations and relevant recommendations offered for consideration. Having said that, my delegation has the following comments to make. We fully understand the current situation and the limited resources available. We welcome the introduction of cost-effective policies and measures
in order to ensure the sustainable development of the Convention. Thus, the full involvement of all stakeholders, in particular the accredited NGOs, are necessary in both the national and international implementation of the Convention. Taking into account the various features and geographic imbalance of the accredited NGOs, we support the recommendation on the revision on the process and criteria for NGOs to improve their advisory capacities and potential contribution to the implementation of the Convention. We would also appreciate the opportunity for exchange of experiences, expect better synergy between Culture Conventions of 1972 and 2003 and 2005. However, to synchronize between the conventions, we believe more study is needed on the advantages and disadvantages before appropriate mechanism is to be established. Regarding to the recommendation on transferring all the evaluation function to one body, we would like to, if possible, make further invention on later items on the agenda. Thank you once again, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Are there any... Latvia, sorry. And
thank you.
Morocco.
Latvia also congratulates the prepared evaluation and analysis of the UNESCO conventions in general, and then 2003 convention as the first among the analyzed conventions. As it was already highlighted by the Internal Oversight Service, the conventions are really important instruments that form basis for UNESCO action in the field of culture. So we really welcome the evaluation done. We also strongly welcome the due attention which is paid to the implementation of this convention at national level, thus treating the questions of legal and policy instruments being adopted at national level. And to our understanding, there is importance to capacity building on these issues and detailed debate on variety of experiences that have been gained at national level concerning the implementation of the convention. In what concerns other recommendations proposed at this moment of the debate, Latvian delegation would like to strongly encourage the adoption of the proposal to establish one single body for evaluating all the nominations and requests, and this by suspending the subsidiary body and thus within the forum of the present consultative body. To our understanding, this would contribute positively to the consistency of the evaluation work and to the involvement of non-governmental organizations and individual experts in the work of the evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, next floor is Morocco, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Le Maroc, à l'instar des autres membres du comité qui se sont déjà exprimés, voudrait saluer l'IOS pour ce travail d'évaluation qui a été fait, un travail tout à fait intéressant que nous avons lu avec beaucoup d'intérêt. Nous pensons que c'est une étape importante dans la mise en œuvre de la Convention de réfléchir sur ses mécanismes et sur son fonctionnement. Nous nous posons néanmoins des questions sur le cadre théorique adopté pour cette évaluation. Ces résultats sont tout à fait importants, mais en même temps, notre Convention est jeune, 10 ans, comparé par exemple aux 40 ans de la Convention du patrimoine mondial, et une théorie du changement se justifie-t-elle au regard des 10 ans de la Convention et même des 6 ans en vérité de sa mise en œuvre si on considère les premières inscriptions depuis 2008. Ensuite, nous pensons qu'il y a deux niveaux importants d'évaluation. Le premier est interne à la Convention elle-même, ses mécanismes de fonctionnement, ne sont peut-être pas parfaits. Comme tout instrument normatif, il a ses défauts, comme il a des qualités. Nous nous efforçons évidemment, et nous remercions l'IOS de nous y aider pour améliorer ce fonctionnement. Donc il y a ce niveau interne, d'évaluation interne qui est, à notre avis, important parce que cette convention est spécifique, comme le sont les autres conventions culturelles de l'UNESCO. Ensuite, il y a le niveau comparatif. Lorsqu'on la compare avec les autres conventions culturelles, et là, c'est un travail d'envergure qui nous attend. Et effectivement, il est grandement ébauché dans cette évaluation. Mais c'est lorsqu'on la compare, pourtant, on constate que la Convention se place très bien dans le peloton, si l'on peut dire. Et lorsqu'on regarde le document qui nous est présenté par l'IOS, la Convention se place en deuxième position après la Convention du patrimoine mondial en seulement 10 ans de mise en œuvre, après 10 ans seulement de son adoption. Donc, lorsqu'on la compare aux autres, le bilan est plutôt positif. Maintenant, au niveau interne, s'il y a des difficultés de fonctionnement, disons des imperfections, c'est important de les rectifier, c'est ce à quoi nous nous efforçons. Sur la question particulière de la recommandation la recommandation 11 sur laquelle un certain nombre de délégués se sont déjà exprimés, j'aimerais bien y revenir par la suite dans le débat, Monsieur le Président. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Burkina Faso, please.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Président. Je voudrais tout d'abord, en tout cas, traduire ma satisfaction et mes remerciements au gouvernement de la République d'Azerbaïdjan pour les conditions de séjour dont nous bénéficions depuis notre arrivée ici, et également aussi remercier le secrétariat pour la qualité des documents mis à notre disposition et puis pour toute l'organisation de la présente session. Je voudrais réagir par rapport au rapport d'évaluation soumis à notre appréciation pour dire qu'effectivement nous apprécions positivement ce rapport-là qui vient faire le point un peu de la mise en œuvre de la Convention et comme tout à l'heure le délégué du Maroc le disait, et qui fait également le lien avec les autres conventions existantes dans le domaine de la culture. Nous apprécions positivement, comme je le disais tout à l'heure, ce rapport. La plupart des recommandations effectivement issues de cet audit-là sont des questions, je crois que nous avons eu très souvent à débattre au cours des sessions du comité et je crois que c'est une interpellation effectivement à ce que nous puissions davantage rationaliser et rendre plus efficace la mise en œuvre de la Convention et faire en sorte que cette Convention, effectivement, même si elle n'a que 10 ans, figure parmi les meilleures conventions dans le domaine de la culture. Il y a plusieurs recommandations qui attirent particulièrement mon attention, mais pour l'instant, j'aimerais effectivement intervenir par rapport à l'une des recommandations que je trouve quand même fondamentale pour moi, c'est la recommandation 20, qui consiste à renforcer le partage informel des exemples de travail intéressants. Je crois que c'est quand même une opportunité que nous avons et que nous ne saisissons pas peut-être à sa juste valeur. Je crois que les échanges informels, effectivement, entre les différents États, entre les différentes institutions intervenant dans la sauvegarde du patrimoine culturel immatériel, sont en tout cas une occasion pour renforcer les capacités pour moi et également pour partager les informations. Je crois que si effectivement chacun de nous intègre ces aspects-là, évidemment qu'on pourrait s'inspirer des bons exemples de part et d'autre. Il y a d'autres recommandations également qui m'interpellent beaucoup, mais comme on reviendra sur ces recommandations-là, donc je pourrais réagir en ce moment. Merci bien, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much. Now, Spain, please.
Sí, gracias, señor presidente. Nos queremos unir a las felicitaciones por la excelente organización que el Gobierno de Azerbaiyán ha prestado a todos los delegados y delegadas que forman parte de este comité y agradecer también, por supuesto, a la Secretaría un documento de reflexión. Todo lo que son documentos de reflexión siempre son de agradecer porque, de alguna manera, facilitan el debate que creemos que esta Convención necesita especialmente. Como siempre, nuestra delegación ha puesto de manifiesto en todos los comités su preocupación por esa reiteración acerca de la supresión del órgano subsidiario de manera tan reiterada que la Secretaría siempre propone y que creemos que los miembros del comité no tenemos claro todavía que se quiera suprimir. Tampoco estamos de acuerdo con los argumentos que se establecen. No creemos que sean lo suficientemente sólidos como para suprimir un órgano que está previsto en la Convención y que solo lleva funcionando tan solo 4 años, cuando además en todos los informes hay una unanimidad sobre el buen funcionamiento de este órgano. Por tanto, nos gustaría tener más tiempo para este debate, para esta reflexión. Es una medida demasiado radical, creemos, como para que sea aprobada el primer día, y pedimos a la Secretaría que este tema, como han dicho los compañeros, los colegas de Brasil, de China y de Marruecos, sea debatido con el tiempo que merece. Gracias.
Thank you. Namibia, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. We would like to thank the Director of the IOS for a very clear evaluation, which bring to the fore a number of successes but also a number of challenges we need to look at. We find it interesting to note that the Convention is considered highly relevant, but the reasons for such consideration vary considerably depending on the stakeholder consulted. I wonder if the Director of IOS can expand on these, the type of findings they found. Secondly, the IOS evaluation has identified a number of gaps as outlined on page 10. We will not repeat them because the Director has enumerated them and we need to reflect on how best we can address them. As a first step, we are of the opinion that a sustained awareness raising and capacity building is the answer so that countries really start to understand and appreciate the Convention and the benefit they can derive from it for the benefit of their communities. This is the only way to motivate governments to invest more in the safeguarding of the ICH. And lastly, we looked at the recommendations and we find that they relate well to all the challenges identified in the evaluation, but some of the recommendations are a bit vague and not explicit enough on the how the challenge should be addressed. We have a particular interest in recommendation 8. What's my recommendation 8? Where it is said that recognition should be given to those state parties that submit nominations to the USL. I would like to have some explanation, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you very much. Peru.
Gracias, señor presidente. Antes que todo, quiero agradecer al gobierno de Azerbaiyán por su hospitalidad y al hacerle ser la primera vez que hago uso de la palabra, deseo felicitarlo por su designación como presidente. Agradecemos el documento que nos han presentado, el que contiene algunos aspectos que ya hemos discutido antes y algunos de ellos, algunas de las recomendaciones hechas por la auditoría, nosotros compartimos, como el hecho de que la convención, la pertinencia y el valor de la convención, pero sin embargo hay otros aspectos que nosotros, con los cuales nosotros no estamos de acuerdo. El hecho que, por ejemplo, ha mencionado España, no consideramos que se ponga en duda las capacidades de un Estado y su transparencia y su imparcialidad en su actuar. Hemos visto que en reiteradas ocasiones, lamentablemente, hemos recibido por parte del Secretariado argumentaciones para poder suprimir el órgano subsidiario, lo cual nosotros no aceptamos. Nosotros vamos a ahondar luego, más adelante, en el debate en sí mismo sobre la decisión que nos presentan sobre el órgano subsidiario en sí mismo. Pero hay otro punto que nosotros queríamos, a manera de pregunta, saber por qué se empezó con la evaluación de una convención tan joven como la del 2003, cuando esta evaluación supuestamente tenía que comprender las 4 convenciones de cultura, porque no se ha presentado un resultado global. Tal vez las conclusiones y las recomendaciones que se hagan para esta convención puedan ser comunes, muchas de ellas compartidas para las otras convenciones de cultura. ¿Por qué empezamos a discutir una convención que tiene apenas 10 años? ¿Por qué no hemos empezado con la convención del 72, por ejemplo? Quisiéramos que tal vez esto se nos explique y por qué no tenemos una evaluación general. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Azerbaijan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Evaluation report by the Internal Oversight Services. We commend their work, as we believe that the proposals, recommendations they gave are quite efficient to streamline our efforts to make the whole process more credible, more efficient, and more result-oriented. My delegation shares the most recommendation given by this evaluation report, but there are certain elements, certain recommendations which we believe needs to be clarified. There are certain moments that we need to clarify, and I guess we will come back to this issue when the draft decision will be discussed. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Czech Republic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. We would like to join the other delegates in expressing our delight and appreciation of the report, which has given us very important feedback on our work. And we will definitely reflect it during the debates this week. There are several points which we consider particularly important, but I don't want to repeat what the other speakers have already said. Maybe just a small remark concerning the sustainable development. We hope to see progress on making links between the ICH and sustainable development. There has been an ongoing discussion on the subject, but for our future work, we feel that we would need to adopt more precise definitions based on concrete examples from the field, and some of them have been presented by the standard-setting evaluation document. We would also like to ask a question either to the Secretariat or to the representative of the IOS to explain in more detail the rationale behind the idea formulated in recommendation number 16, that means the cooperation among UNESCO cultural conventions. Is there any particular proposal for that, or if there is any, how would such activities should be coordinated or maybe even financed? Thank you.
Thank you. Uganda.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Uganda would also like to thank the Director of IOS and UNESCO, especially the Secretariat, for carrying out this evaluation at the time when the Convention is celebrating its 10th anniversary. Uganda would like to raise two issues. One is the issue of linkages. The second is on the issue of community participation, especially the community participation on inventorying, design, and implementation of safeguarding measures. We've noted over time that many states parties do not meet the criteria of community participation. And because of that, we would like to suggest that maybe in the next capacity building initiatives, it would be good to put much emphasis on the issue of how to encourage these parties to enlighten the NGOs and the communities on their involvement in all and many steps related with the identification of the elements that they submit. And then finally, we would like to say that the recommendations in some cases are not very definite in terms of the exact action that is expected if we are to look at the element of result-oriented planning and implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Albania.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And since this is the first time I take the floor, I'd like to sincerely thank the government of Azerbaijan for hosting the committee and for their generous hospitality. I would also like to thank the IOS for this very interesting evaluation. We do agree with most of the recommendations. I would give special status to recommendations 8, 9, 10, 11, 13, 14. We do think indeed that there is time for re-evaluation of the representative list, and we absolutely believe that we should give priority to the international assistance as well as the urgent list as two main tools for the actual safeguarding of the intangible cultural heritage. And of course, as we have expressed in other sessions of the committee, we do support the recommendation 11 about the suspension of the subsidiary body. Indeed, we do not think it's a matter of time. It is a matter rather of credibility of the procedure. In our opinion, the procedure from an outside point of view is not credible because it's the same intergovernmental experts that do the evaluation in the subsidiary body and then come to sit in the committee to debate and to endorse their own recommendation. But we will come back to this subject later. Also, I would like to have more clarifications about the rationale behind recommendations 3 and 5 and what the evaluation suggests that should be as a link between this convention and the sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you. Nigeria.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Nigerian delegation wishes to congratulate you on the seamless way you have been handling these proceedings, and we welcome the report of the IOS, but we strongly have some reservations about recommendation 9, 11, and 22. Recommendation 9, because it needs more clarification itself on what other stakeholders and misconceptions really means. On recommendation 11, we wish to state that so far the subsidiary body has been doing a credible job, and we would like to keep it that way. Thank you. Then we would like to talk about recommendation 22. We do not understand the NGO being referred to here. Is it the NGOs accredited by UNESCO or NGOs particular to the nomination file? We will make some clarifications about this when the debate starts on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Egypt, please.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. بالتأكيد أود بالنيابة عن بلدي وبمشاركة كل زملائي أن أتوجه إليك وإلى دولة أذربيجان حكومة وشعبا بالتحية والتقدير لما قدمتموه لنا من أجل انعقاد هذه الدورة، كما أوجه الشكر للسكرتارية على الجهد الكبير الذي تقوم به دائما لتيسير أعمالنا في كل دورة انعقاد، والشكر أيضا للتقرير والذين قدموه. كما لا يفوتني أن أتقدم بالتحية والشكر لدولة الإمارات العربية على كرمها في أن تتيح لنا ترجمة باللغة العربية، فتتيح لي أن أتحدث بلغتي الوطنية. فالشكر لدولة الإمارات مجددا، كما لا يفوتني بشكل شخصي أن أتوجه بالشكر إلى المملكة الإسبانية على أنها يسرت أيضا أن تكون هناك ترجمة إلى الإسبانية، فقد أتاحت لي أن أنتقل من الإنجليزية إلى العربية إلى الإسبانية، وهذا أمر يجعلنا أكثر حرية من أن نكون محصورين في لغة واحدة أو لغتين فقط. الشكر لهم مجددا. واسمح لي سيد الرئيس أن أقدر الجهد الذي قام به مرفق الإشراف الداخلي في هذا التقرير الممتاز. هناك بعض طبعا أنا نؤيد ما ورد في كلمات الزملاء المحترمين من بلجيكا والبرازيل والمغرب وإسبانيا والصين وأذربيجان وغيرهم ممن سبقوني إلى الحديث، حتى لا أستهلك الوقت وحتى لا أكرر ما أشار إليه من جوانب إيجابية وأخرى تحتاج إلى مناقشة. هناك أمر سيد الرئيس أرجو أن نحسمه أو أن نقرر فيه أمرا، هو ما يرتبط بمسألة الإلحاح، وهو أمر مستحب على مشاركة السكان المحليين أو المجتمعات المحلية. سيد الرئيس، كما أن هناك تنوعا ثقافيا هائلا يميز الثقافة الإنسانية بين الدول المختلفة والجماعات إلى آخره، فإن كل الدول ليست سواء فيما يرتبط بالتنوع الثقافي داخل الدولة نفسها. سأضرب مثالا بسيطا ومختصرا في حالة مصر على سبيل المثال. إذا أردنا أن نقدم مثلا تسجيل ملحمة شعبية منتشرة موجودة، وقد حدث هذا بالفعل، لكن فيما لو أردنا أن نقدمها وفقا للإطار الخاص بالاتفاقية وموافقة السكان المحليين، الحقيقة قد أكون قاصرا في فهمي في هذه الحالة، لأنه هذه الملحمة على سبيل المثال يؤديها رواه منتشرون في أنحاء مصر. هل الموافقة السكان المحليين هنا هي موافقة الرواه أو موافقة المتلقين أو ممثلين للمتلقين؟ إذا كانت هذه السيرة أو هذه الملحمة شائعة في مجتمع كالمجتمع المصري وموجودة بين رواه كثيرين، ما المقصود هنا أو كيف نحدد هنا المقصود بالسكان المحليين؟ هذا مثال افتراضي أرجو أن نجد إجابة عنه، وأن نؤمن أنه ليست كل الدول سواء، قد يكون المقصود بجماعة محلية جماعة صغيرة الحجم صغيرة العدد يشيع بينها لون من ألوان التراث الثقافي غير المادي، ومن ثم فإن من السهولة بمكان أن نحصل على موافقة لبعض الممثلين. لكن عندما يرتبط الأمر بمجتمع كالمجتمع المصري يتكون من 85 مليون إنسان، كيف يمكن في هذه الحالة أن نحصل على موافقة السكان المحليين على العنصر؟ شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you. Granada, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My delegation, as was done by other delegations, commend the IOS and the team involved in this evaluation. And my delegation agrees with the majority of the findings and the recommendation, while recognizing that some of them will need more consideration, in particular if their adoption requests a real consensus that would make it successfully applicable. In particular, we are underlining the necessity to consider recommendation 11. Although my delegation is in favor of having one body to consider all nominations, we should take this opportunity to get a real dialogue and, if possible, a consensus on this issue. We recognize the need for capacity building and development of adequate legislation and policy. And we agree that international assistance should be given further attention to allow it to bring in an adequate manner assistance to the state parties. Concerning recommendation 15, requesting to strengthen UNESCO's cooperation with WIPO, we are more than happy to see that more than 10 years after the adoption of this convention, the proposal submitted by Caribbean countries, and if some of the persons here were attending the negotiations, they should recall this. During these negotiations, a proposal was submitted by Caribbean countries, namely Grenada, Barbados, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and was supported by the Dominican Republic. This proposal was calling for this cooperation, taking into account the work of WIPO that was undertaken since more than 15 years in favor of the recognition of the intellectual property rights of communities. And this is much more important now that our committee is preparing guidelines concerning commercialization. And we should agree that any acceptable commercialization should be beneficial to the community and not to commercial firms. Finally, concerning recommendation 16, concerning exchange of expertise, cooperation and synergies between UNESCO's Cultural Convention, we do agree that we should all work together in this purpose, but we should always remember that these conventions are separate conventions and should be implemented in different ways. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. We are going on our schedule. I was inquiring about Peru. Do you want to make another interference, second time? So please follow the reglement, very short.
Sí, señor presidente, muchas gracias. Seré lo más breve posible. Quería reaccionar con relación a los comentarios hechos por la delegada de Albania, en el sentido de la falta de credibilidad que genera la participación de expertos representantes de los estados en el órgano subsidiario. Y voy a hablar en particular por el caso del Grupo Electoral 3, América Latina y el Caribe. Han habido hasta la fecha hay 3 expertos de América Latina que han participado en este órgano. Son el señor Francisco López de México, la señora María Ismenia Toledo de Venezuela y la que les habla, Soledad Mujica, de Perú. Yo simplemente quiero afirmar que estos 3 expertos que actualmente trabajan en sus respectivos estados han sido elegidos por la UNESCO para integrar el grupo de los 11 expertos de América Latina que desarrollan los talleres en América Latina de fortalecimiento de capacidades. Es decir, son 3 expertos reconocidos no solamente por sus estados, sino por la propia UNESCO, y que han desarrollado, por lo tanto, un trabajo muy meritorio y fuera de toda sospecha de presión por quien fuera. Entonces, desde América Latina nosotros consideramos que el órgano subsidiario cumple muy bien su función y está fuera de toda sospecha. Por lo tanto, no vamos a seguir discutiendo más el tema de la credibilidad del órgano subsidiario, porque consideramos que está plenamente demostrada en el caso del Grupo 3 ampliamente, y lo sabemos que también en los demás casos, pero hablamos por América Latina y el Caribe. Quisiera referirme entonces a la recomendación número 8, que me parece preocupante porque busca señalar con el dedo a aquellos que presentan candidaturas a la lista de salvaguardia urgente, señalarlos con el dedo y felicitarlos. Felicitar a aquellos países que presentan candidaturas a la lista de salvaguardia urgente implica, a su vez, de alguna manera, señalar también con el dedo a aquellos que presentan candidaturas, por ejemplo, a la lista representativa. Es decir, estaríamos estableciendo una jerarquía que la Convención no establece entre unos países y otros países por cuanto eligen un mecanismo u otro mecanismo. Hemos dicho que los 4 mecanismos previstos en la Convención son mecanismos de salvaguardia como el propio nombre de la Convención lo indica. Entonces, no viene al caso establecer jerarquías. Hay que dejar a los Estados en libertad de elegir cuáles son los mecanismos que se ajustan mejor a sus necesidades. Por otro lado, en el caso de la recomendación número 9, tampoco estaríamos de acuerdo en cuanto se habla de ideas erróneas que hay que clarificar con respecto a los objetivos y la utilización de la lista representativa. Nosotros consideramos que la lista representativa cumple una función muy importante que no está sobrevalorada, como dice con frecuencia el informe del IOS, sino que está bien valorada porque es útil. La cantidad de estados que ponen expresiones o presentan expresiones a la lista representativa nos habla de que es un mecanismo eficiente para la salvaguardia. Entonces, veamos cómo fortalecer los otros mecanismos. Estoy totalmente de acuerdo, pero no tratemos de señalar, castigar a la lista representativa. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much. Tunisia.
بدوري أريد أن أثمن ما جاء في التقرير الذي تميز بنظرة شاملة اعتمدت على المقارنة، ولكن كما قال بعض الزملاء المندوبين أن هناك بعض التوصيات لا تخلو من عمومية، فهي ينقصها التدقيق، وهذا ليس ناجما عن التوصيات في حد ذاتها، وإنما عن مشكلة المفاهيم والمصطلحات. وكما تفضل بذلك زميلي مندوب مصر، فالمعاني التي نعطيها المفردات والمصطلحات ليست هي نفسها هنا وهناك، من ذلك أن مشاركة المجتمع المحلي والجمعيات ما زالت محل أخذ ورد، كل يؤول الأمر حسب مفهومه، فلا بد من القيام بشغل مهم في باب تحديد المفاهيم والمصطلحات حتى نخضع في نهاية الأمر إلى نفس العمل. شيء آخر بالنسبة إلى النقطة السادسة، أثمن ما جاء فيها من توصية، ولكن بحكم أن الاتفاقيات الثلاث هي مستقلة، فمن الأجدر قد يكون أن نفكر أو نقترح إطار عملي للمشاركة وتبادل الأفكار بين الاتفاقات الثلاث. وشكرا.
Thank you very much. Kyrgyzstan.
Like other countries, I would like to thank the team evaluated the convention, and we have now a very thorough analysis and reflection upon the convention. As Brazil has pointed out before, it probably would be more effective to consider recommendations one by one, because they are very different by their meanings and by what is more important, by their influence on the future activities. And also I would like to bring your attention on the recommendation 22, convention theory of, about linked to a convention theory of change. The theory of change itself was not evaluated thoroughly, or at least it was not presented here, might be. So it's hard to, link to the thing which the convention was evaluated, but the quote is the theory of change was not. So probably we need to, pay attention on these kind of issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Uruguay, please.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Siendo la primera instancia en que tomamos uso de la palabra, queremos agradecerle a su gobierno por esta acogida y la hospitalidad para esta reunión, y lo felicitamos por la designación. Seremos muy breves, pues no queremos reiterarnos respecto a los delegados que nos precedieron, pero sí debemos felicitar al auditor por este excelente informe, muy esclarecedor y muy completo, que sin duda realza lo que tiene que ver con el funcionamiento de la Convención y la relevancia de esta importante Convención. Queremos rescatar lo que tiene que ver en este informe con la participación, la importancia de la participación de las comunidades en la preparación de los expedientes y así también en las actividades de salvaguardia, así como la necesidad de incrementar el fortalecimiento de las capacidades y la asistencia internacional. Por último, respecto a las recomendaciones, queremos plegarnos a lo dicho respecto a la recomendación número 11, que creemos es bien interesante y bien importante de definir. Por lo tanto, el Uruguay va a estar pendiente de los próximos debates que podamos desarrollar respecto al futuro de los dos órganos, consultivo y subsidiario. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Before going to ask Mr. Kuipens to answer the questions which came during this discussion, I would like to give the floor to one of the observers. Vietnam asks the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Vietnam is pleased with the attention that the iOS evaluation has given to the link between ICH and sustainable development, and is called for clarifying the nature of this link, identifying its potential both for sustainable development and for the viability of ICH, and identifying the potential risks that development, if not sustainable, holds for ICH. It is in connection with the issue of sustainable development, and particularly of climate change, that the authority of the two provinces of Nghệ An and Hà Tĩnh in the central part of Vietnam, and Vietnam National Institute of Culture and Art Studies, Ministry of Culture, Sport and Tourism, have proposed to provide a voluntary supplementary contribution to the Intangible Cultural Heritage Fund in item 12, later in the agenda of this session. Our schedule makes it necessary to leave before that item is discussed. So, with your permission, Mr. Chairperson, we'd like to explain the proposal of that contribution now. The authority of the two provinces of Nghệ An and Hà Tĩnh and the Vietnam National Institute of Culture and Art Studies take note that Vietnam is among those most threatened by the climate change, especially in its coastal and mountainous areas. The flood tide and the rise of the ocean level cause the blowing up of the coastal shores and stone penetrated in the cultivated field. The cultivated land is reduced, and the soil is degraded due to the heavy rain, reducing the fertile soil layer. The natural resources such as minerals, water, and biodiversity have been influenced heavily by the climate changes and the rise of the sea level. Together with the environment and natural resources protection, Nghệ An and Hà Tĩnh provinces have developed the action plan on the adaptation to the climate changes as the foremost important task and the decisive factor in their sustainable development. So the two provinces of Nghệ An and Hà Tĩnh and the Vietnam National Institute of Culture and Art Studies believe that the relation between the cultural heritage and the climate change is a topic of great importance and timeliness. To that end, we have been discussing with the Intangible Cultural Heritage section the possible organization of a UNESCO Category 6 expert meeting on intangible cultural heritage and the climate change during the first half of 2014 in the city of Vinh, Nghệ An province, Vietnam. The proposed meeting offered an opportunity to highlight the fundamental importance of ICH. Should our contribution be accepted later this week by this committee, we look forward to collaborating closely with the Intangible Cultural Heritage section to organize the meeting. Thank you for your attention, and with our best wishes and the successful Intergovernmental section. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to apply to observers to keep on the agenda because we will have a lot of time to discuss the other questions concerned with the proposals and so on. In favor of following our schedule, I would like to propose to give floor to another 4 delegations before closing the debate on this basis and giving floor to Mr. Kuipers. Because later on we are going to pass to the item 2, the second report, and again you will have chance to discuss. So the delegations are following: Norway, Senegal and Venezuela, and then we will give floor to the non-governmental organization Traditions for Tomorrow. And that is, after that I would like Mr. Kuipers to reflect, to respond to the questions raised here, and we will pass to the second matter, where we will definitely give floor possibility to other delegations to discuss. Thank you. Norway, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing us as observers to share some observations with you, and congratulations to you and your fellow hosts for a professionally organized meeting. First of all, we would like to express our satisfaction with the report by IOS. All in all, the report confirms our impressions of how the work has developed during the short history of the Convention. The major achievement of the Convention so far is that the Convention has significantly broadened the international discourse around the definition and meaning of cultural heritage. That is very positive. Furthermore, the activity of the Secretariat has been of high quality, and we would especially point out the high level of transparency regarding the processes related to the different constituent tasks of the Convention. We take note of the observations presented by IOS, pointing at the fact that the relative importance of the representative list is overrated, though this list has represented a huge workload on the committee and the Secretariat. On the other hand, other mechanisms, such as the urgent safeguarding list, registers of best practices and international assistance, are underused. We strongly support the recommendation by IOS that a better balance between the different mechanisms of the Convention should be obtained. We also take note with satisfaction the positive evaluation of the worldwide capacity building program with a network of qualified experts. Norway is of the opinion that so far this capacity building program in many respects constitutes the most successful achievement in the 10 years history of the Convention. The lesson learned is that when implementing international normative instruments like conventions, strengthening the capacity of states parties should be at the core of the activity. However, the IOS report underlies one important task not being solved so far, there is no systematic monitoring mechanism put in place that would allow UNESCO to follow up the participants several months after they had been part of a workshop. We would like to express our support to the recommendation to put in place a robust, result-oriented system of monitoring and follow-up evaluation, to gather data about the effectiveness and impact of the strategy and to identify opportunities for improvement. We would probably all agree, Mr. Chairman, that the ultimate goal of this convention is to have a real and lasting impact on states parties in their efforts to establish favorable framework and conditions for intangible cultural heritage. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Norway. Senegal, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, de nous donner ce privilège, en tant qu'observateur, de partager quelques réflexions. On ne remerciera bien sûr jamais assez votre pays pour la généreuse hospitalité et la qualité de ce travail. Merci pour ça. Pour moi, une évaluation ou un audit, c'est un instrument de bonne gestion. Donc, qu'on ait 4 ans ou 10 ans, la pertinence ne se pose pas donc en termes d'années. Maintenant, que les conclusions soient hâtives ou prématurées par rapport à des décisions aussi importantes que supprimer un organe qui est performant, là je suis d'accord. Mais l'audit ou l'évaluation, pour moi, c'est un instrument, c'est un outil qu'il faut maintenir. Deuxième observation, nous pensions à l'époque, en 2003, quand la Convention a été adoptée, que c'était une opportunité pour l'Afrique, pour ses civilisations de l'oralité et son patrimoine riche en expressions culturelles orales. Nous constatons effectivement qu'il y a un problème. Est-ce que c'est un désintérêt? Est-ce que c'est une non-maîtrise un peu des enjeux de cette convention ou pas? La vérité, c'est qu'effectivement, il y a un désintérêt. C'est pourquoi cette évaluation présente l'importance de nous interpeller, nous, États parties. Si je prends le cas du Sénégal, en 2006, déjà, on avait un chef-d'œuvre du patrimoine qui est passé sur la liste. Mais c'est le seul bien. Alors qu'entre-temps, en 3 ans, en 3 ou 4 ans, on a mis 3 sites, 3 biens sur la liste du patrimoine mondial. Et tout le monde sait combien il est difficile de mettre un bien sur la liste du patrimoine mondial avec la Convention de 72. Donc il y a un problème de volonté politique, il y a un problème d'option. Faisons également cette évaluation chez nous pour comprendre pourquoi il y a peut-être un problème dans la mise en œuvre. Deuxième et dernière observation, je pense que le secrétariat joue un rôle extrêmement important dans la mise en œuvre. Dans l'assistance financière, qui permet à certains pays comme les nôtres de faire un travail important pour la sauvegarde et la mise en valeur de ce patrimoine, nous venons de bénéficier d'une assistante pour faire un peu l'inventaire des musiques traditionnelles. Mais deuxièmement, il y a également cette assistance technique. Ces rappels, ces observations pertinentes sur les dossiers qui vous amènent à vous remettre en cause, à reprendre, à s'y intéresser. Je pense que c'est un rôle extrêmement important que le secrétariat joue et qu'il devrait continuer de jouer. Enfin, la formation, le renforcement des capacités. Le secrétariat vient d'organiser avec l'EPA, l'École du patrimoine africain à Porto-Novo au Bénin, une formation de renforcement des capacités par rapport à l'inventaire avec également les communautés locales. C'était une expérience réussie. Plus d'une dizaine de pays l'ont apprécié positivement. Et les experts qui étaient là étaient des experts de qualité. Donc, certains mots me paraissent trop forts quand on parle de crédibilité, surtout en parlant de ces experts. Je voudrais donc remercier particulièrement et de manière vraiment très énergique le secrétariat pour ce travail qui est en train de se faire et appeler à avoir des recommandations très concrètes, très pratiques par rapport à la mise en œuvre, mais déjà à notre niveau, nous, États parties. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Venezuela, please.
Gracias, señor presidente. Como todos los países, por supuesto, nos sumamos al esfuerzo del gobierno de Azerbaiyán, a su pueblo, por la organización de esta actividad. Si escuchamos nosotros con atención el video a través del cual nuestra distinguida dama Irina Bokova nos dirigía la palabra, ella indicaba que hemos de obrar para fortalecer los métodos de trabajo de la Convención debido a un presupuesto que se merma y a una gran carga de trabajo que crece cada día. Posteriormente, nuestra admirada secretaria de la Convención, Cécile Dubel, nos hacía reflexionar sobre el mismo tema. 25% menos del presupuesto para esta Convención y el gran desafío de que los países miembros de la Convención hagan sus aportes. Eso es lo interesante de estas reuniones de UNESCO, de estos encuentros del Comité Intergubernamental del Patrimonio Cultural Inmaterial, porque volvemos al mismo tema, en el momento menos apropiado, en el momento en que se están celebrando 10 años de esta Convención del Patrimonio Cultural Inmaterial, estamos frente a una evaluación. Es importante, indudablemente, porque es natural hacer este tipo de evaluaciones de la manera como la Convención se ha desempeñado. Pero si sumamos el debate hasta donde se ha dado, indudablemente, señor presidente, usted habrá observado que la mayoría de los presentes en esta convención señalan puntualmente en esa evaluación un aspecto con el que no están de acuerdo, y es el de la supresión del órgano subsidiario. ¿Pero por qué razones no se está de acuerdo? Porque si alguno de los aspectos importantes de esta convención, mandatos que nos ha dado la convención a los Estados miembros, ha sido el de participar a través de la creación de este órgano subsidiario y participar con expertos, con esfuerzos económicos cada país. El gobierno bolivariano de la República de Venezuela, nuestro gobierno junto a otros países latinoamericanos, hemos formado parte de este órgano subsidiario y nos hemos transmitido las experiencias unos a otros y estamos convencidos de que se ha hecho bien y que lo han hecho bien también otros países de la región. Indudablemente es un tema a considerar y como se inició en la discusión a partir de la intervención del representante de Nicaragua, nos preguntamos a qué tipo de renovación se está refiriendo el informe en el momento de abordar de una manera más amplia el tema que se discute. Nuestras palabras, nuestras consideraciones a nombre de la República Bolivariana de Venezuela, y es un tema que hemos discutido con países hermanos de América Latina, es no estar de acuerdo con ese desatino de proponer una vez más la suspensión de este órgano subsidiario, porque significa aportes significativos en lo económico que se han venido dando a estos esfuerzos comunes de la UNESCO y aportes de calidad técnica y de calidad intelectual de cada uno de nuestros países, donde tenemos equipos muy calificados para hacer esta tarea que ahora se quiere trasladar a grupos privados y a expertos independientes. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Now we are giving possibility to express their view to the tradition for tomorrow. Non-governmental organization representative, please.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Nous avons évidemment lu avec le plus grand intérêt le rapport d'IOS, qui pour nous est un premier bilan après un long chemin déjà parcouru, non simplement au niveau des instances de la Convention, mais aussi et surtout sur le terrain, là où nous, les ONG, nous apportons un soutien aussi à la mise en œuvre, notamment en lien avec les communautés de la Convention. J'aimerais relever la recommandation, si vous me permettez, numéro 15, dont Granada a parlé et j'en remercie. Notre ONG participe depuis plus de 10 ans au processus en cours à l'OMPI. Nous avons d'ailleurs, avec le soutien de la Commission suisse pour l'UNESCO, organisé un panel à Genève qui a réuni les deux secrétariats de l'OMPI et de la Convention 2003 sur ce thème pour encourager un dialogue dans cet esprit. Tradition pour demain se demande, depuis la mise en œuvre de la Convention, si le travail entrepris, que nous entreprenons tous ici, en encourageant les communautés à revitaliser, à promouvoir, à diffuser les expressions culturelles, n'implique pas un risque parfois grave d'un usage abusif par d'autres que les communautés de ces savoirs, de ces expériences que nous cherchons à sauvegarder. Une mélodie, un mouvement de danse, des dessins, des parures, des savoirs médicaux et bien d'autres. Nous ne pouvons donc dans ce sens que soutenir sans réserve la recommandation d'IOS concernant un rapprochement avec l'OMPI au moment où la Convention, ces instances, se préoccupent à juste titre d'une dimension de développement durable des effets de la sauvegarde du patrimoine culturel immatériel, il nous semble que c'est ici un début de cette construction de ce développement durable et reconnaître au patrimoine immatériel, dans les mains des communautés, une valeur d'une importance économique importante. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. And the last one, Japan wanted to one short comment, and then we give floor to Mr. Koipens.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for giving me a floor. My intervention will be very brief. Japan also would like to appreciate the excellent work done by the IOSS, and there are certainly many valuable recommendations that we are going to discuss later more in detail. At one point, we'd like to emphasize that in following up the recommendation, we should always bear in mind the importance of alleviating the workload burden to the Secretariat from the cost-effectiveness point of view under current circumstances. And maybe before the response from the Director of the IOS, I would like to ask one question about the rationale of the cooperation among different cultural conventions of UNESCO. That is a question raised by another delegation, especially because of the difference in objectives and also scope and the framework of management. There seems to be quite difficulties in synchronizing or making synergy with those conventions, especially synchronizing the meeting of the state parties of those conventions seems to be, from the beginning, very difficult to me. So I just wanted to ask more clarification on those points. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think that now it's time to have some responses. And first I would like to give the floor to Mr. Koipens. And then if we will feel it necessary, maybe some other questions will be answered by the members of the Secretariat and Directors. Please.
Thank you, Chairman. First, I would like to thank the delegations for the general appreciation that was expressed for this important exercise. I would also like to make a general point that we have made recommendations, and therefore they're called recommendations, they're not called impositions. These are recommendations that you need to consider and how best and in what format to implement. And this also answers the concern which was expressed by one delegation who said that we wanted to be more, it was Uganda, I believe, who says, can we better define these recommendations? You know, our intention is not to provide a recipe, a book for easy implementation, but the value added is that a body like this discusses the recommendation and takes away what's useful and then implements what it thinks can add value. Also, there were a couple of comments on the theory of change, and I will come back to that because the first speaker questioned that, and I'll probably try to give some explanation of why we approached it this way. But let me say here that for us it was a method of evaluation, not necessarily something that you need to adopt, but it's a useful tool for us to do the evaluation. And then finally, before I get to the specific questions, I would like to apologize for not always being fully able to answer all my questions, and for some of them I'm going to have to ask for the help of the Secretariat. So, Mr. Chair, if you would be kind enough to also give the floor to the Secretariat. I mean to the culture sector, because I'm Secretary too. Now, let me see if I can shed some light on a number of specific points. The first question was Nicaragua, who indicated that it was not always clear to him whether the theory of change was applicable. But as I said in the introduction, for us this was simply a tool, because if I read Article 1 of your convention, it talks about protection, it talks about safeguarding, it talks about raising awareness, it talks about cooperation as a result of that convention. Now the question is, how do you measure that? That's very hard to go from a convention to the ultimate impact. So we had to build some kind of a causal chain, cause and effect. And that's basically what the theory of change was. So in other words, this started through a dialogue among member states with rise to the convention. The first step then that we examined is which member states have adopted this convention, have ratified this convention. How many are there? That's step number one. And then step number two is which member countries have adopted this convention into legislation. You know, that's also an important finding. The second one is, once the legislation has been adopted, which member states have actually implemented the policies, and once they have agreed to policies, which member states have actually implemented these policies, and what is the impact of implementing these policies. So it's like building a house where you start with the foundations and the stones and the roof, which ultimately constructs a whole. That's basically the theory of change that we used in order to analyze the impact of normative work, because it's very hard to analyze normative work. And I must say, we are very proud to kind of pioneer, experiment this in theory, and to our knowledge, you know, we are the first in the United Nations evaluation group to try to do that, and everybody's kind of watching how this is going. Okay, I would agree with Belgium on on the comments that were made, and also on the agreement that more work needs to be done in a number of areas. And also it was a useful comment that we need to look at linkages with other organizations. I would also agree with the more technical comments about improving the methodology by building in feedback loops, and we would very much welcome to this dialogue and see how we can improve this, how we can further develop the methodology. Actually, Brazil raised the question or made the point that recommendations are addressed to different parties. That is indeed the case, and I guess that the debate that will follow, once you look at the draft resolution, you will see how these recommendations can best be addressed. But as I said earlier, these are recommendations, not impositions for you to consider, and some of them will need to be implemented by the Secretariat, some of them need to be implemented by you. There was also a request by Brazil to clarify recommendation number 9, which states that there are misconceptions about the use of the representative list. Our general comment, and also more clearly reflected in the evaluation, was that our view was, and some interventions agreed with this, that the representative list may have been overrated and disproportionate of time may have been spent on this, while there are other areas that perhaps could be could be better elaborated and more time spent on these. Actually, I would also agree with the intervention by China, who made the point that more work is needed and more studies need to be done to demonstrate the effects of this convention. And I would also agree with Latvia, who underlined the importance of capacity building, and that it would be useful to actually share best practice, how this can best be done. Morocco, I thank Morocco for the comments, and Morocco also questioned the theoretical underpinning of this theory of change, and I believe I have explained it, why we did that. The bottom line was, for us, was to see whether this convention had any sense at all. What's the purpose of this convention? How can we demonstrate what the impact is? And that's why we used this methodology. Burkina Faso noted the link with other conventions, and this is also a point that was raised by a number of speakers, asking about the rationale of looking at the links with other conventions. It was the last speaker, Japan, who was most outspoken on this. But what we have in mind by looking at the cooperation among conventions is, for instance, what is the link between this convention and sustainable development, and what is the link in other conventions? What is the gender dimension in this convention compared to the gender dimension in the other conventions? How are other conventions organized compared to this? Are there opportunities to work together and, for instance, on the Secretariat, to build a common platform? And some of them, as you've heard this morning from our ADG, has already started in cooperation with support functions. Okay, Peru asked the question why we evaluate this convention and why not the others. Well, the answer is that we are currently evaluating all the conventions of the culture sector. This just happened to be the first one. And I believe we did this first because we thought, or the Secretariat asked it to do it first so that we could present it to this body. And we thought you would find it useful to discuss it. And I think it was a good decision to do that, because you seem to have been interested in debating this evaluation and getting early feedback. So the simple answer is that we do all the conventions, and this just one happens to be the first one. Czech Republic made the point that more work is needed on the impact on sustainable development. We certainly would agree with that very much, and we would love to do more work on this and see what can be done in this area. Specifically, we all know there's an economic impact of the intangible cultural heritage, and sometimes it's positive. In a very few instances, it's also negative. But I believe the evaluation says that we would need to do more work to provide better and more precise answers. I very much liked the analogy by Egypt of whether we need to listen to the storyteller or the audience. I think we probably need to listen to both. The point was that in the evaluation, we made the point that we need to involve the community to help us guide what is important and what is not, rather than make top-down decisions. So the point is here, listen to communities and see you know, what bottom-up advice we can get. I guess I stop here, Chairman. These are the most important questions. A number of very important statements were made by Norway, and I fully agree with these. Also with Senegal and Venezuela. But I believe these were statements rather than questions, so let me stop here, Chairman, and thank you very much.
Fine, and there is a question which was requested to be answered by Mr. Bandarin, please.
Actually, I just wanted to integrate briefly with a comment on an issue that seems to come back all the time, and I think this concerns UNESCO and as a whole, which is the relationship between the conventions. Now, obviously, and I keep repeating it all the time as I deal with this issue, let's be clear, every convention is legally autonomous, independent. Nobody is going to try to mix anything that is legal, procedural. This will be equal to profanation. We're not going to do it, right? So please consider this a complete silos. We will never, ever, 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 ever do any mixing in terms of legal and procedure. But this is not the way in which the world is built, right? So very often when we are in society, people talk about cultural heritage in physical terms and intangible terms and so on. So as we think that the scope of the conventions is to strengthen society and communities through education, building a social identity and so on, we think that it is important to consider the conventions as a package because they are different, but they cover in a complementary way a full range of different definitions and different ways in which society approach heritage. We see that particularly when we deal with the issue of culture and development, which is a very important platform that UNESCO has built, and where we see that every convention contributes to the definition and the strengthening of this platform, each one in its way. We see it very often in the conflict and post-conflict operations, where using both the physical heritage and intangible heritage and the other, say, tools that UNESCO has put in place. Let's not forget that there are other conventions for the fight against illicit traffic and protection of heritage in conflict and so on. So in terms of operations, the complementarity of the convention is very, very important, and we will never have to forget it, because I think that we all agree that the conventions are essentially the tools and the end is the society and not the opposite. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have by no means exhausted these issues, but I think we have had a very useful airing of many different perspectives. As I explained earlier, I propose that we turn now to the second half of our document, the audit, since many of its findings and recommendations are complementary to those we have just been discussing. So there may be questions which can be repeated and so on. Then we will look back to the short discussion of the second part of the report, and to make this report I invite again Mr. Kuipers. Today is your stage, you know. Benefits. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And again, thank you for the opportunity to discuss our work in this respect. This presentation covers more the mechanics of how the convention is administered. It deals with the how rather than the why, which was the presentation of the previous presentation. It is again a study done by IOS of how UNESCO manages this convention. Again, this is important because the largest share of what the culture sector does, or the largest share of its budget, is to administer these conventions. So we looked more at the efficiency and the effectiveness of this rather than the impact and relevance, which was the focus of the previous discussion. Again, I have a short PowerPoint presentation that I would like to share with you. On the next slide discusses that this review covered all 6 cultural conventions, and it aimed to assess the adequacy and efficiency of the working methods of the Secretariat in its standard-setting work in the culture sector. The scope of the review covered the working methods of the Convention Secretariats, as well as the funding arrangements and the arrangements of the meetings of the governing bodies. On the next slide, it shows that before I get into this, it should be noted that member states assigned a high priority to the conventions related to these activities. This was decided by the UNESCO's executive board when they determined these priorities. But the first point I wanted to make, and this is a point that has already been made, is that there's an increasing workload with decreasing funds. And this situation is not sustainable. I could probably stop here, and this is the most important point. There is more work than there is money, and this is a problem, and we need to find solutions to this. There is clearly a disconnect between resources, especially staff resources, and the demand for services, and solutions need to be found. In this review, we looked at other models in the UN for other conventions and found that most conventions set up separate trust funds to cover all expenses, all Secretariat expenses, including those of staff. We also found that better mechanisms could be put in place for interaction between the logistics of conventions. And perhaps some efficiencies could be achieved in the Secretariat by using common platforms, common administrative platforms. And I have 3 slides to cover these different issues. On the next slide, shows that there are 3 different sources of funding. The first is the regular program. The second is the fund itself, which is adequately funded. And third, there are the extra budgetary resources. As I said, the fund itself is well positioned with sound and adequate reserves. We also noted that the majority of the posts in the Secretariat are financed by regular program resources. And this can be seen as some kind of an anomaly because regular program funds, which belong to all members, are used to pay for the work of the convention signed by not all, but a large part of the members. On the next slide, we found that the meetings of the governing bodies could also perhaps be looked at with a view to find ways to perhaps make it more efficient and cost-effective. But we also noted that the 2003 convention, the Secretariat of the 2003 convention generally worked efficiently and transparently. We also found that the advisory services obtained for this convention were also cost-effective relative to some other conventions. But we found that some services like IT and web design, communication and meeting logistics are somewhat fragmented in the Secretariat, and that a common platform could be more effective. But we understand, and as the ADG already said this morning, that measures have already been put in place to do this more effectively. On the next slide, we make the point that there is a need for better application of the cost recovery system. which may need a possible change in the financial regulation of the fund to be able to do it to the full extent possible. And then I wanted also to draw your attention to the fact that the General Conference requested a self-assessment of the efficiency and effectiveness of the governing body. So at some point of time, this governing body will also have to do a self-assessment of its own efficiency and effectiveness. And this will be followed by an audit by our external auditor, who will conduct an external review of the whole governance process. Finally, during this review, we made a number of specific recommendations that will need to be considered and addressed, and let me list a few. First is the recommendation to supplement the current funding structure with additional resources, either through compulsory or voluntary contributions to cover staffing, administrative costs, preparation, and also translation of documents. Second, we may need to give some thought about prioritizing the workload of the Convention Secretariats to align it with the available resources. Third, you may also want to think about reducing the frequency, the duration, and the agenda of some meetings. As I already mentioned, we may need to give some thought about the implementation of and application of the cost recovery policies. And as we also mentioned, we need to explore in the Culture Secretariat, and this is currently being put in motion, to explore more common logistics to include additional services that add value and provide cost-effective solutions to support the work of all Convention Secretariats. Finally, there is a recommendation to formulate a more coordinated fundraising strategy to support these conventions. So I would like to reiterate the key finding, which is that the increasing workload, albeit judged to be very well done by the Secretariat, is not compatible and not sustainable with the decreasing amount of funding that's available. Nobody really welcomes this situation, but this is a reality that we need to address and that we cannot ignore. So thank you, Chairman. Let me end here.
Thank you. I think that there are some recommendations which we are already implementing in the convention, so it can be a good example to other cultural conventions, but still we have to discuss and see what's going on. That's why I would like to open the floor for the general debate on the issues just brought before us by the director of IOS and the recommendations that require our attention. I think that this debate will take us somewhere 30-35 minutes, no more please. That's why please follow the time schedule and define all the intervention very strictly with the recommendations and your proposals. So please. Belgium, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Belgium will like to start, of course, by thanking Director IOS again, the services of UNESCO. It is a very harsh finding, of course, that the current situation is unsustainable. It requires us to look for solutions, and Belgium is ready, of course, to think about this and help to address this issue. I have two very small technical questions and one observation. My first question concerns recommendation 1.A. Supplement the current funding structure with general trust funds formed out of contributions from the contracting state parties. What is meant exactly here with contracting state parties, please? And then The second question concerns recommendation 1E, modify the financial rules and regulations if necessary to allow application of cost recovery policy. We have a cost recovery, of course, at the UNESCO level within the organization that is embedded within the financial regulations. Does this cost recovery policy apply to convention funds? That's my second question. And then an observation on 1C on the frequency, duration, agenda and possible synchronizing of meetings. We will have some reservations. For example, reducing the frequency, I think, will be difficult when looking at the articles in the convention. Synchronizing the meetings of the state parties might also pose some practical challenges. Reducing the duration of the agenda, we're very willing to think about this, but looking at the agenda, for example, for this meeting, every point seems highly relevant. So we're not sure if we would be able to reduce it a lot. We would be ready to rethink the agenda. So that may be as a final point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Namibia, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. We thank the IOS Director for the audit. We fully understand the challenge of the Secretariat in relation to the workload with reduced financial resources, and we highly appreciate what they have been able to achieve so far. We have a question on this specific issue, because here we speak specifically about the Convention Secretariat. How much do the other staff within the culture sector support the Convention Secretariats, in particular when it comes to activities such as assistance requests, fundraising campaigns, and periodic reports? That's my first question. On governing bodies, we have thus far managed to limit meeting duration, but we need further reflection on the other two, in particular the synchronizing of meetings of General Assemblies. I wonder how we want to go about this. The General Assembly of the 1972 Convention takes place towards the end of the General Conference. Is the thinking here to have these meetings parallel to each other or one after another, and will this not be a huge burden on both the Secretariat and the state parties alike? Let's go on. Then regarding the coordinated fundraising strategy with common resource mobilization team, it is an interesting idea because you have the same team fundraising for all conventions and therefore treating them equally. But we also know that certain donors have preference among conventions, and we are wondering how we are going to go about this. On the table, recommendations on page 9 are the measures recommended temporary while we are waiting for the financial situation of the organization to improve, or is the intention to move completely away from the current practices? The second question on the table on small a on contributions, as Belgium just referred to, our question is when we say the contributions on contributions of on voluntary basis or compulsory or voluntary basis, we would like to establish whether this is a question of either or does the committee need, or is the committee expected to decide on this issue? Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you very much. Grenada, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I would like to associate my delegation with what was said by Belgium and Namibia concerning, first of all, the proposal to reduce the frequency of the meetings. As we know, there is a minimum that is already indicated in the convention. It's not possible, of course. Extraordinary meetings or meetings of the Bureau could be, as in the past, organized in electronic ways with video conference or whatever. And concerning the proposal to synchronize the meetings, it is also very difficult sometimes for small delegations to prepare for several meetings, and this is what we are witnessing here today. We are going out from the General Conference. We are here in Baku. We are going next week for the 2005 committee. It is not always very easy to have all the meetings in the same time. Nevertheless, there is another proposal that I would like to clarify. It's the request of the General Conference for self-evaluation, self-assessments of governing bodies concerning their efficiency and effectiveness, as mentioned by Mr. Coppels. If I not mistaken, I think that the General Conference will ask the external auditor to give us a frame for this kind of self-assessment. Is it a subject that we have to deal with in this committee, or is it going to the General Assembly? This is what I would like to clarify. And the last question concerning the coordination of fundraising strategy of all conventions. We know that our convention is benefiting from a lot of extra budgetary funds, especially for specific activities, and we are very thankful to all the state parties who are contributing. The other conventions have other problems. For instance, the 2005 has invested in professional advice, and I would like to know if this is considered that we could use the experience of the others and use it for free while they have paid, or give them our tips to be successful. Thank you.
Thank you. Brazil, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I should also like to thank IOS for this, for the document. But while reading through the document, I had the feeling that most of the recommendations were actually addressed to more the other conventions than rather this one. Because I think there are many of the issues in this document that I think we sometimes, perhaps we had the crystal ball and we already saw that a few years back. So I think some of the issues here are already addressed. But there is one issue that had not been addressed in this document that I think is, that we think is important, is more synergy between the funds, especially when it comes to requests for funding. And not only the funds for the conventions, but also, for example, the fund for the promotion of culture. What we've seen is that sometimes a state party tries, for example, get funding for international assistance in this convention, it gets frustrated. But if we actually go through it very deeply, we can perhaps see that there could be another pathway for it to actually achieve a positive result. So there should be also more synergies between the funds, we believe. I have a question, though, with regards following up what Renata said about fundraising strategy, which is regard to recommendation 4. I believe there's a lot of, perhaps not a lot, but I think there is perhaps competition between the conventions, because the sources for extra budgetary funds are perhaps the same. Most of the extra budgetary funding come from state parties. So a good way to have a common fundraising strategy is that we would only approach once the potential donors. But I would like to ask the culture sector, because it says here in the response that the implementation of this recommendation is foreseen by January, so next month. So I would like to understand better what is foreseen in the Secretariat perspective. How is that being foreseen? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that there is no other request for intervention. I would like to ask Spain. I didn't see. No, only. Spain, please.
Sí, perdone, señor presidente, por esta última intervención. Estaba discutiendo con mis compañeros de delegación. Sí queríamos quizá poner de manifiesto la intervención financiera que realizamos determinados estados en esta convención, que quizás sí es diferente a la que se produce en otras convenciones, ¿no? Hemos detectado que hay un párrafo en el que se habla de la interpretación al inglés y el francés de los comités, en el sentido de expresar que por parte de la UNESCO solo se pueden financiar esas dos lenguas. Bueno, pues a nuestra delegación nos gustaría que quedara puesto de manifiesto que determinados estados sí que tratamos de que podamos hablar en idiomas, como ha dicho el distinguido delegado de Egipto, en otros idiomas como es el árabe y el español. Y creo que eso es un esfuerzo que estamos realizando determinados estados y que seguiremos realizando en la medida de lo posible y creemos que debe de quedar constancia de ello. Por otro lado, también detectamos que realmente uno de los grandes gastos que produce esta convención es el pago del órgano consultivo, de ese órgano que parece que se quiere mantener frente a la supresión del órgano subsidiario que como vemos en ese informe, no genera ningún gasto. También, como ha dicho el distinguido delegado de Venezuela, es un gasto que realmente cubrimos los estados, asistiendo a la reunión y generando una formación y un capacity building, como se dice ahora habitualmente en inglés, que financiamos los propios estados y que gracias a eso la Secretaría tampoco tiene que hacer ese tipo de formación. Entonces, pues sí queríamos poner de manifiesto que realmente los gastos que se generan son relativos al órgano consultivo y no relativos al órgano subsidiario, que es uno de los argumentos que se establece en el documento para suprimir al órgano subsidiario. Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you. No other proposals, questions? Okay, so please, I think that it will be better for us if Mr. Koopmans will answer some questions, and then Madame Duvel will also join.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Let me try to answer at least some of the questions, and my apologies if I can't answer them all. The first question was by Belgium on point 1A, what we mean with contracting state parties. To my understanding of this is the state parties that have signed the convention. There was also a question on the cost recovery policy. There were at least two questions on that. UNESCO has a cost recovery policy in place, which means that if you have regular program costs that can be attributed to a specific activity or program, you can charge that activity or program with these clearly identified costs. So there is a policy in place. First of all, generally this policy is not very well utilized in UNESCO. Number two, as far as this convention is concerned, there are at least gray areas in the financial regulation of the special account itself, and an interpretation would be useful, because Article 3 of the financial regulation says, to make payments to assist in the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage in accordance with the terms of the convention. So is that direct cost? Is that indirect cost? So it would be useful to clarify the cost recovery policy. In our view, Of course, if you have members of the Secretariat who exclusively work on the servicing of a convention, these are costs that could be considered, at least in part, for cost recovery and being charged to that account, which is a practice currently not done, or not very much done. Okay, so that's why we made that recommendation that, first of all, in a way, you have a fund which exists, which is clearly well funded. I don't have the exact amounts that are in the fund currently, but I thought it approaches an amount of 9 million. So there are resources available, but there are limitations to finance staff costs through this funding, and we recommended that this be looked at. Okay, I will not comment on there was one specific question on the self-assessment by Grenada. It is indeed correct that the self-assessment will need to be done. I don't think it's the intention that this is to be done now. I think it was agreed that the external auditor would develop some questions, some guidelines to how to do that. And I believe, but I'm not quite sure, but I think the time frame was that this needs to be done by the end of 2014, but to be verified. There was also a question by Namibia on also these contributions, the compulsory and the voluntary. The compulsory contributions, what is meant there is, of course, the 1%. And the question is whether currently in the convention it's up to 1%. It cannot be more unless the convention is changed, which is unlikely. So therefore, this would need to be supplemented by voluntary contributions. I think these were the most specific questions to which I had an answer. So let me stop here, Mr. Chair. And if there are questions I missed, we may come back to that, but before I do, maybe I'll give the word to the Secretariat who may want to supplement that. Thank you.
Yes, I think that it's good to give the floor to Secretariat. Mrs. Duvel, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et je vais parler en français parce que j'ai déjà des plaintes du groupe francophone dès le premier jour. Alors, je voudrais vous dire que sur la question de l'application des recouvrements des coûts, c'est vrai que nous n'appliquons pas cette politique qui est approuvée au sein de l'UNESCO et qui est même une politique des Nations Unies. Nous ne l'appliquons pas de manière consistante, mais nous l'appliquons au fond. Toutes les contributions volontaires additionnelles, c'est-à-dire les contributions que le comité accepte en majorité pour le renforcement des capacités, sont construites comme un projet extra-budgétaire traditionnel. Il n'y a plus de donateur à partir du moment où le donateur est rentré dans le fonds, puisque le fonds est multidonateur, donc le donateur n'est plus en train d'approuver la construction budgétaire. Le donateur donne une somme, comme le Brésil va le proposer dans quelques jours, pour un propos. Le comité l'accepte, mais ensuite cette somme est construite budgétairement avec une application de la politique de recouvrement des coûts, qui comporte deux tranches, on va dire. Une tranche qui sont des coûts qu'on appelle indirects et qui sont des coûts qui sont difficilement traçables et qui sont plutôt des coûts des services centraux, de tout le travail qui est fait pour faire bouger l'argent, pour l'évaluer, pour appuyer sur un certain nombre de validations. Et puis il y a ce qu'on appelle les coûts directs et qui sont les coûts à la fois du travail que nous pouvons faire pour monter un projet et le mettre en œuvre, que les collègues du bureau hors siège peuvent faire, mais aussi les coûts des personnels qui sont embauchés pour faire les formations, les coûts des voyages des participants aux formations, etc. Donc tout ça, ce sont des coûts directs et qui sont déjà construits. Il est vrai que le règlement financier, l'article 5.2, prévoit une application de la politique de recouvrement des coûts. Et si vous lisez le règlement de ce compte spécial qu'est le fonds, vous lisez que le compte spécial est débité des dépenses effectuées conformément à l'objet défini à l'article 3 ci-dessus, c'est-à-dire tout ce qu'en décide le comité, y compris les dépenses administratives directes s'y rapportant expressément. Mais il est vrai que, par cette expression, on dirait qu'il ne s'agit que des dépenses directes et pas des coûts indirects. Et la politique de recouvrement des coûts comporte les deux types de coûts. Donc, il y a peut-être une nécessité d'ajuster un petit peu cette notion de recouvrement des coûts, de clarifier à quoi le comité accepte de l'appliquer. Et en tout cas, ce qu'il y a de sûr, c'est qu'il y a toute une partie des dépenses qui sont faites dans le fond, comme par exemple le Sénégal qui vient de mentionner le plaisir qu'il a eu de recevoir une assistance internationale, et le Mali également. C'est quand même des gros chiffres, hein, c'est 300 000 $ d'un côté, je crois que c'est 200 000 de l'autre, donc imaginez que ça fait déjà 500 000 $. Et pour l'instant, nous n'avons jamais appliqué de politique de recouvrement des coûts à ces actions décidées par le comité et qui vont entraîner toute une série de travaux qui sont tout à fait équivalentes à un renforcement des capacités. Il est vrai que les pays là sont les acteurs principaux, c'est eux qui mettent en œuvre, mais nous, on est derrière de manière très constante et continue pendant les 2-3 années du projet. Donc, je crois que derrière cette idée de recouvrement des coûts, il y a une application consistante, cohérente, pas seulement aux aspects des contributions dédiées à des objets spécifiques, comme elle est déjà appliquée, mais aussi à toutes les dépenses encourues par le fonds à la suite d'une décision du comité et qui, effectivement, demandent au secrétariat de l'UNESCO tel qu'il est composé, payé par le programme régulier, de travailler pour cette mise en œuvre. Et donc, c'est un peu contradictoire peut-être avec la politique de recouvrement des coûts qui demande à ce que tout projet, toute mise en œuvre de fonds extra-budgétaires soit remboursé à l'UNESCO quand c'est du personnel du programme régulier qui le met en œuvre. Donc ça serait plus un complément de ce qu'on fait déjà qu'une nouvelle disposition. À la Namibie, je vais quand même répondre aussi, puisqu'elle a posé une question précise, j'ai essayé de faire un calcul rapide. Combien de personnes au secrétariat de la Convention travaillent pour faire le backstopping, des rapports périodiques, des assistances internationales? Je ne me souviens pas très bien ce qu'elle a cité comme liste, mais en tout cas, je peux vous dire que nous n'avons que 5 professionnels payés sur le programme régulier qui s'occupent de l'ensemble de ces choses, y compris toute l'activité de renforcement des capacités. Notre personnel n'est pas suffisamment large pour qu'on puisse se permettre d'avoir des personnes dédiées pour chacun des mécanismes. Et donc, nous n'avons que 5 personnes sur le programme régulier. Nous avons heureusement 5 autres personnes qui sont payées par des fonds extra-budgétaires, des détachements de gouvernement, mais qui sont des personnes temporaires, parfois 2-3 années, mais enfin très temporaires par rapport au programme régulier. Voilà. Et puis, je crois que la question du Brésil sur la plus grande synergie entre les conventions, par exemple autour de l'assistance internationale, je crois que c'est précisément le point de l'évaluation appelant à une plus grande synergie. Je crois que cette synergie, elle a place dans des circonstances pareilles où effectivement un État a besoin d'un soutien pour quelque chose et parfois, je ne dirais pas qu'il se trompe de convention, mais en fait ça n'a aucune importance. Il faudrait qu'on soit plus en train de collaborer pour aider l'État, quel que soit le fonds auquel il applique, pour se diriger, formuler de manière adéquate. Je pense aussi au plan de sauvegarde qui parfois, pour les sites du patrimoine mondial, sont très à cheval entre le patrimoine immatériel et le patrimoine mondial et qui mériterait tout simplement qu'on s'asseye ensemble, chose qui n'a pas beaucoup lieu encore et donc il faut faire des progrès là-dedans. Je crois que j'ai répondu à tout ce que je pouvais répondre, j'espère.
From my point of view, the discussion of these questions can cause a lot and very long discussions in general. But we have to proceed on our agenda and go further, moving forward to the other parts of our agenda items. So I would like to return now to the draft decisions. Madame Duvel, if you don't mind, we will pass to the discussion of the decisions before to introduce the first draft decision before us concerning the evaluation. Decision 5.C.1. Please, Mrs. Duvel.
Yes, as some of you have noted, this recommendations are divided in different addresses, I would say. Sometimes it is to the states, sometimes it's to the states and the secretariat, sometimes it's to everybody. So we have tried to organize the recommendations in packages to whom they are addressed. Paragraph 4 of this draft decision directs 3 recommendations to the state parties, since they essentially concern how they themselves implement the convention at the national level. Paragraph 5 takes in those recommendations that concern the convention's entire family, state parties, alone and in the General Assembly, civil society, the Secretariat, and others. Achieving results on these recommendations is beyond the capacity of anyone acting alone, but requires concerted action from all. Paragraph 6 and 7 concern some possible amendments to the operational directives that could, if the committee so wishes, be presented to the 5th session of the General Assembly. Because the committee has already had preliminary discussions on each of these in its previous sessions, sometimes several sessions, you may decide they deserve the General Assembly's attention at its next session. Each of these possible amendments also figures into one of the points of your agenda later in the week, and the committee may wish to bracket these 2 paragraphs and return to them later. Paragraph 8 concerns responses that are entirely within the authority of the committee itself. It is for you to decide how you apply the operational directives and how much opportunity you wish to provide to observers such as accredited NGOs to participate in your debates. Paragraphs 9 and 10 again concern possible revisions to the operational directives that are brand new or less familiar than the ones proposed in paragraphs 6 and 7. Since the committee has not previously debated these in any detail, the draft decision proposes that the Secretariat prepare draft documents for your examination and your 9th session, and the revisions might then come before the General Assembly in 2016. Paragraph 11 groups those recommendations that fall largely within the responsibility of the Secretariat, if you so request. These are things that we already are doing, could do better, or would be happy to do if you ask us. Finally, paragraph 12 concerns greater cooperation among UNESCO's 3 biggest cultural conventions, 72, 2003, and 2005, and addresses an invitation to their intergovernmental committees to join efforts while also asking the Secretariat to facilitate that cooperation.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you have laid all things very clearly, and by all means we have to go further paragraph by paragraph, if you don't mind. If there are any members with specific amendments, I remind you that all these amendments must be provided to the Secretariat within writing form whenever possible during the period of the work of the session. Now let us start discussing the matter one by one. For paragraph 1, I note that the Secretariat has introduced a reference to the code number of the evaluation as document 8.com-inf5C. With that amendment, do I see any objections to adoption paragraph 1? No. Paragraph, I forgot. Paragraph, I'm coming. Paragraph 2, nothing that, any objections? Approved. Paragraph 3. No objections? No. Sorry. Sorry. Paragraph 3. Nigeria and Spain, I think. And Peru. Okay. Please, Nigeria.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is my considered and weighted opinion that paragraph 3, we say welcome to findings of the evaluation and recommendation offered therein, is too blanket and too broad for us to adopt, because some of us have some observations about some of the recommendations. So if we adopt that, we are saying we agree totally with all the recommendations, which I think some state parties have expressed strong reservations or some form of reservations. Thank you.
Spain, please.
Sí, el sentir de nuestra delegación es exactamente el mismo que acaba de decir Nigeria. Realmente no podemos felicitarnos de todas las recomendaciones que se establecen en ese documento y, por lo tanto, como no se ajusta a la realidad, pues quizá deberíamos de suprimir ese párrafo. Gracias.
And Peru, please.
Gracias, señor presidente. Vamos en el mismo sentido que acaba de expresar las delegaciones que nos precedieron y particularmente España. Gracias.
Brazil.
Mr. Chairman, we would like to propose perhaps a middle ground. Instead of welcoming, we take note of the findings of the evaluation, the recommendation. So I propose this takes note of. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it okay if we will take note for Spain and the other delegates? Peru? Okay. Let's approve like a take note the finding of the evaluation and the recommendations offered therein. Okay, fine. Approved. Paragraph 4. Within 3 positions, A, B, and C. No objections? Approved. Paragraph 5 with A, B, C, D, E, and F, please. I propose one by one? Okay, let's go ahead. Paragraph 5A. Any objections? I don't see. Approved. But it is after. So. Perry, please. Paragraph 5A. We're discussing
sí, señor
paragraph
presidente,
5A.
va en el sentido de lo que dije en mi intervención anterior, y es que no se puede reconocer particularmente a los estados que someten candidaturas a la lista de salvaguardia urgente. Entonces creo que la segunda parte del párrafo debería eliminarse, porque nuevamente estaríamos, como lo dije, culpabilizando a aquellos que someten candidaturas a la lista representativa o a los otros mecanismos de la Convención.
Thank you. Spain.
Sí, gracias, presidente. Sí, nuestra delegación apoya precisamente el sentir de la delegación de Perú. No se puede, de alguna manera, felicitar a unos estados por presentar candidaturas a una lista en frente a los estados que presentan candidaturas a la lista de patrimonio cultural inmaterial representativo o a los proyectos de buenas prácticas. Gracias.
I would like to remind you that we, in this case, must submit some definition which we can discuss and we approve or whatever. That's why I would like to have some proposals concerned of the definition which we will have here. So, any other comments? Grenada, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, in the recommendations, we have one recommendation clearly asking to promote international assistance. And here we are only promoting urgent safeguarding lists. And so can we complement this? Are we forgetting the international assistance in our recommendations? or I'm not seeing it in the proper place. Thank you.
Nigeria, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Concerning 5D, we have to be careful about the convention, the WIPO Convention. The WIPO Convention talks about genetic resources, scientific knowledge, because I did attend the meeting in April. So it's not only about traditional knowledge, we have to qualify it carefully to be sure of where the cooperation stands. It has to be specific. The standard setting instrument is not on traditional knowledge per se, it's on scientific knowledge, genetic resources, and traditional knowledge. Thank you.
Nicaragua, please.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Únicamente para apoyar la moción presentada por Perú y soportada por España también. Muchas gracias.
But again, I am reminding that we need some definitions and amendments which can be defined and accepted by us. So I would like to have such kind of proposals. We are not discussing now the matter. Spain, please, again. No.
Sí, gracias, señor presidente. En ese sentido que usted propone de que se haga una redacción alternativa, nuestra delegación propondría la siguiente redacción, y es el promover todas las posibilidades de protección que ofrece la Convención, tanto la lista representativa de Patrimonio Cultural Inmaterial de la Humanidad, la lista de medidas de salvaguardias urgentes y el registro de buenas prácticas. Es decir, promover todas las posibilidades que ofrece la Convención, los tres mecanismos. Llamar la atención sobre la utilización de los tres mecanismos. No poner la atención en uno de ellos, sino llamar la atención sobre los tres mecanismos, las tres posibilidades que ofrece la Convención. Gracias.
Albania, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would also like to make the same comment as Granada, and I would like to support what Peru and Spain and others said about deleting the second part of the paragraph that especially recognizes the states that submits to the USL, but I don't agree with the latest amendment proposed by Spain, because promoting all the tools really does not mean much, in the sense that it's like a general concept. So what I would like to propose is first to delete this second part of the paragraph that some member states are concerned, and I'd like to add further promotes the international assistance as an effective tool of safeguarding the intangible cultural heritage. Indeed, we do believe that the international assistance is the most important tool that should be promoted. So if the committee would agree with that, thank you.
Madame Duvel has some comment.
Just wanted to note that in paragraph 11 of this decision, 11E, there is a recommendation to promote international assistance as a capacity building mechanism for state parties, which address recommendation 14. So there is a special line for international assistance somewhere else. But if you want to merge, of course, it's possible. It's paragraph 11E of the draft decision.
So there were several proposals concerned with the paragraph 5A. Paris, Spain, Nicaragua, Albania proposed to delete. Spain to promote all the possibilities of safeguarding provided by the convention mechanism. So what is the vision of the members of committee? Brazil, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we would go along with Albania. That is, I think we could we could delete the second half of this paragraph, as said by Peru, Spain, Nicaragua, that we do not need to single out state parties that present dossiers to this list. But I think the first part is quite important, that we reposition that we don't have this stigma that usually the World Heritage List in danger has, that this list is for state parties that fail on doing something. So I think it's important that we reposition that. So we would like to keep the wording as it stands, but deleting the second half, as proposed by Albania. With regards to the international assistance, it's actually, the Secretary just pointed out for paragraph 11E, but also paragraph 6B deals with international assistance. Since, as we have said before, these recommendations are sometimes addressed to the Secretary of State parties and whatnot, it doesn't really matter if we repeat ourselves. So I think we could go in line with what Albania has suggested and add a sentence to Albania's amendment is not reflected on the screen, but if I understood correctly, it would be to promote international assistance as a tool for safeguarding intangible cultural heritage. And then you could even put in brackets recommendation 13 and 14. So put in brackets recommendations 13 and 14. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So if I could understand it clearly, there is proposal to take away the first part of this, the second part of this sentence, to leave the first part as it is, and to take the second one from the text. If it will be like that, then the committee members can come to a consensus? If so, please read it again.
Maybe I could read the new paragraph as proposed by several states. So, calls upon state parties and the General Assembly, as well as the Secretariat, Category 2 centers, non-governmental organizations and all other stakeholders to promote the urgent safeguarding list by repositioning it as an expression of state parties' commitment to safeguarding and to the implementation of the Convention, and promote international assistance as a tool for safeguarding intangible cultural heritage.
Granat, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would be able to go as Albania and Brazil have proposed, and like Mrs. Duvel just read it, but I don't see why we would limit the possibility, the promotion of international assistance only for safeguarding, while we know that it is good also for capacity building. It is good for all possible implementation of the convention, so why to limit it? Maybe we could keep the expression for the safeguarding and the implementation of the convention as for the first part of the paragraph, but but it should be edited differently. Thank you.
But we are just proposed to do the same. Promote the urgent safeguarding list by positioning it as an expression of states parties' commitment to safeguard and to the implementation of the convention, and to promote international assistance as a tool for the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage and so on. So I think this is the way which we all are coming to. I don't think any confrontation within our proposals. If so, can we approve it like that? No response. Approved. 5B, please. Any comments? Brazil, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's going to be really hard to clarify all the misconceptions because we don't know what they exactly are. We would propose a more positive wording to say promote the purposes and the appropriate use of the representative list. Thank you. Promote the purposes and the appropriate use of the representative list.
Peru, please.
Gracias, señor presidente. Perú propone borrar este párrafo. Primero, porque no está claro cuáles son las ideas falsas. Habría que describirlas para saber qué cosa es lo que buscamos corregir. Y por otro lado, con relación a la propuesta de Brasil, promover los objetivos y la utilización apropiada de la lista representativa implica en la segunda parte del párrafo que hay un uso inapropiado de la lista representativa. Nosotros no estamos de acuerdo con que hay un uso inapropiado de la lista representativa. Podríamos aceptar promover los objetivos y la utilización, en todo caso, de la lista representativa, pero no la utilización inapropiada, porque como habría que explicar qué cosa es esta utilización inapropiada y ver si estamos de acuerdo, ¿no?
Thank you. Nigeria.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly, most state parties do not agree there are misconceptions about the representative list. It is the evaluation that said so. So, from the state party's perspective, the Nigerian delegation thinks that this paragraph will not be useful because I don't think there's any misconception, if there's any at all. So I agree with Peru that we probably delete it, or if we want to keep it, just put promoting the purpose and use of the representative list. Thank you.
Granada, thank you very much. Granada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I was told that in Eurostar they are selling pizzas and sandwiches referring to the gastronomy inscribed in the Intangible Cultural Heritage Convention of UNESCO. I haven't seen it, but somebody told me about it. I'm sure that somewhere in the world some misuse exists, and we should not ignore it. I think that each time in the television somebody is referring to intangible cultural heritage by saying World Heritage of UNESCO Intangible list, someone should correct this. And I think if it's not the state parties, I think that when we ascribed some of the elements, we have asked the state party to have a monitoring institution on this. We should not forget that it could be misused. Thank you.
I agree with you that it happens sometimes, but to have monitoring, to have possibility to monitor what's going all over the world in this case is quite difficult. So the states which are providing their files must follow the obligations which while they're applying for such kind of things. So Albania, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would also like to support what Granada said. I believe that there are misconceptions and misuses of the representative lists. About the misconception, what we mean here is it's a subject that has been debated in many meetings of experts in the last 4 years. The fact that the state parties give too much importance to the representative list, and the inscription on the representative list is considered as a goal in itself, and we have organized in UNESCO several meetings, maybe the Secretariat can remind us, which had this subject meetings of experts that were discussing on how to reposition the urgent safeguarding list and the other mechanisms which were treated with less interest than the representative list. So that's about the misconception. And about the use, yes, for sure, there are misuses of element of commercial uses of element inscribed, and this is a common knowledge. So we would go along with the wording proposed by Brazil as the minimum wording that could give here the idea that we are talking about. Thank you.
Got it. Belgium, please.
Yes, considering the fact that the representative list already gets too much attention, we would consider that it already gets too much. We would propose to delete the word promote and to replace it by respect the purposes and the appropriate uses of the representative list.
Not bad. Spain, please.
Sí, gracias, presidente. Quizá en aras un poco a la redacción, ¿no? Y parece que se están generando dos párrafos un tanto reiterativos, ¿no? Y que el sentir de los dos es el mismo, ¿no? Es el promover todos los mecanismos que establece la Convención, tanto para la protección como para la cooperación. Entonces, bueno, nuestra delegación propondría la redacción inicial que habíamos propuesto, porque realmente lo que están diciendo ahora todos los Estados es que promovamos esos mecanismos y reducirlos a un párrafo, porque si, presidente, usted lee el párrafo primero y el párrafo segundo, empiezan los dos de la misma manera, ¿no? Promover la lista de salvaguarda urgente, promover la asistencia internacional, promover la lista. Entonces, bueno, quizá lo podríamos reconvertir todo en un solo párrafo, promoviendo todos los mecanismos de protección que establece la propia Convención junto con la cooperación y asistencia internacional. Gracias, presidente.
Thank you. Tunisia, please.
شكرا. نحن نعتقد أن التركيز ينبغي أن يكون أكثر على التوظيفات والاستخدامات منها من الأفكار، ذلك أن هذه الاستخدامات السيئة أحيانا هي التي تجعل الاتفاقية تنحرف لتخرج عن أهدافها الأصلية. شكرا.
Thank you. Burkina Faso.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais simplement rappeler donc aux collègues délégués que ces recommandations-là ne sont pas venues comme ça du néant. Elles sont parties certainement d'un constat qui a été fait. Et tout à l'heure, on est revenu sur la question effectivement de la commercialisation ou bien c'est la surcommercialisation. On a également abordé la question donc de l'exploitation touristique qui sont souvent effectivement des dessins qui sont derrière les inscriptions. Donc je crois que ce n'est pas venu quand même du néant, ça a son sens et c'est pour cela que nous pensons qu'effectivement pour trouver un compromis sur cette question-là, nous pouvons nous aligner donc sur la proposition du Brésil telle qu'amendée tout de suite par la Belgique. Donc en mettant en avant donc le respect des buts et de l'utilisation donc de la liste représentative. Merci bien, Monsieur le Président.
Okay, now again, Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I understand the point of the appropriate use. We have a suggestion that instead of appropriate use, we say the best uses. By best uses, I'm thinking, for example, multinational files that promote international cooperation and others. So we could have perhaps best uses. And if we keep Belgium's amendment, then we could read perhaps as follows: respect and promote the purposes and best uses of the representative list. Thank you.
I would like to apply to you to try to merge the meaning and the inscription of the, this sentence. I also, this is my personal view, that the position concerned with the respect of the purposes and use of the representative list is quite reflects the total aim of all the delegations, because it's really giving the merge of the sentence and clarifies it. So, Japan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This paragraph is not addressed only to the state parties and General Assembly. Of course, we don't have misconception among ourselves, but this addressed to the NGOs and all other stakeholders. So I certainly would like to maintain this paragraph, and in that sense, I think the Brazilian proposal, newest one, is quite appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Latvia.
Thank you. We also would like to support the proposal of Brazil as amended by Belgium to really keep the wording of respecting the purposes of this representative list in order to have also insight in the problematics that has been raised by initial proposal of the draft decision. Thank you.
So I would like to come to some conclusion, if you don't mind. Can we agree on the proposal of Brazilian delegate? I don't see any objections, principal objections in that. So if no objections, then paragraph 5B approved. C, please. No objections? I don't see any. Approved. D, 5D. Any objections? Amendments? Don't see any. Approved. 5E. No objections seen. Approved. 5F. Don't see either. Approved.
This is into brackets further. So you use this, you put into brackets.
What does it mean? As we agreed that the point 5 and 7 are 6 and 7 are taken into the bracket, and we would like not to discuss them now. We will go further, maintain them for the discussion for a little bit further time after. We will reconsider at our further meetings. So I'm passing to the paragraph 8. A, for your approval. I don't see any. Oops. My time is saying that it's 6 o'clock. So, Peru, please. Any objection or proposal? Please give the definition, if you have any. Amendment.
No tengo una propuesta, pero sí quisiera que hubiera una definición con respecto a qué significa asegurarse que la inscripción de los elementos en la lista representativa reflejen precisamente los criterios indicados en el capítulo 1 y 2. ¿Y por qué nos referimos solamente a la lista representativa? Debería ser en todo caso en ambas listas. Estamos siempre tratando de decir que la lista representativa es débil, es decir, culpando de un mal manejo de esta lista al órgano subsidiario. Entonces, si vamos a pedir que los criterios se apliquen, con lo cual yo estoy de acuerdo, se debe referir a las dos listas, no a una sola. Incluso a los criterios también de las mejores prácticas, ¿no? Y por último, a la asistencia internacional. Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you. Should we immediately have an answer, or Mr. Coppens?
I have no answer, Chair. I mean, there are opposing views. Clearly, Peru expresses her own view. I don't know whether that view is shared or not. So, you know, I have no comment on that. Thank you, Chair.
If we will refer to the recommendations of the OIS, then in the paragraph 10, we have the definition like that. Ensure the inscription of elements to the representative list reflect more closely the criteria and procedures specified in Chapter 1.2 of the Convention's operational guidelines. So the same recommendations were transmitted to the paragraph 8. So I don't think there is any misunderstanding concerning that. Any comments? Morocco, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Sur ce point précisément, notre avis est que nous nous adressons à nous-mêmes. Et cela suppose que nous avons constaté que dans la mise en œuvre de la Convention par le Comité, il y a irrégularité. C'est ce qui semble être sous-entendu dans ce paragraphe A. Le Maroc est d'avis que ce paragraphe doit être supprimé, Monsieur le Président. Merci beaucoup.
Please reflect it on the screen. Thank you. Now, Grenada, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the purpose of the evaluation is to draw our attention on some problems. And if by seeing some problems we can see the neighbor problems too, it's up to the committee to decide whatever he wants to recommend to himself or to any other stakeholder. I do agree with Peru. Sometimes in the inscription, in the files, we can see that the criteria are not closely reflected. So I would propose to ensure that inscription of elements to all lists should reflect closely, not more closely, it should reflect closely. We should have the proof that the criteria is well explained in the file. Closely the criteria and procedures specified in, and then we can mention the different chapters for the different lists. Thank you.
Thank you. Nigeria.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like my colleagues from Peru and Morocco said, it's either it's deleted or the only option is what Grenada has proposed. We extend it to other, the urgent surviving list and the best facilities list. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicaragua, please.
Muchas gracias, presidente. Por economía procesal, nosotros vamos a apoyar la propuesta hecha por Perú. Gracias.
Thank you. Spain.
Sí, gracias, presidente. Siento tener todo el tiempo que nuestra delegación reiterar el mismo argumento, ¿no? Que, bueno, afortunadamente tanto Granada como Perú están en la misma posición. Cuando nos referimos a mejorar, a tratar de promover, debemos de hacer un paquete de todos los instrumentos, como España había propuesto en la primera redacción, de promover todos los instrumentos de protección, que luego ha quedado segregado en varios artículos. Bueno, hemos aceptado, pero aquí se vuelve a producir el mismo problema. Estamos señalando un determinado instrumento de protección. Bueno, pues como dice Granada, o lo suprimimos y no hacemos hincapié en ningún instrumento, o tratemos de asegurar que se mejore, pero todas las listas, no solo la lista representativa de patrimonio cultural inmaterial, sino que se mejore la inscripción de todos los elementos en todos los instrumentos de protección, pero no solo en la lista representativa de patrimonio inmaterial. Entonces, lo que hay que hacer es encajar bien cada manifestación en cada uno de los mecanismos que la Convención propone, que se ajuste cada manifestación que cada Estado presenta a cada una de las listas o registro de buenas prácticas que sea más adecuado a esa manifestación. Pero es un problema de todos los instrumentos, no solo de la lista representativa. Entonces, bueno, esto se puede asegurar o bien eliminando el párrafo, porque ya tenemos la Convención, o bien diciendo que mejoremos todo eso con respecto a todos los instrumentos. Gracias, presidente.
Thank you. Belgium, please.
Thank you, Chair. We have to keep in mind, of course, what we're working on now, and this is the decision on the report of the evaluation of the auditor, and this was especially with the recommendation on the representative list. I think we're mixing things up here. I could understand striking out more closely and just having closely, but our proposition would be having the original paragraph, but with striking out closely, but having the reference to the representative list instead of the reference to all list. Thank you.
Thank you. Burkina Faso.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Président. Je crois que concernant ce point précis, et comme je l'avais relevé tantôt dans ma précédente intervention, toutes ces propositions-là, toutes ces recommandations-là découlent de constats qui ont été faits. J'avoue que, effectivement, je pourrais donc m'aligner sur la proposition formulée par Grenade, l'Espagne, ainsi que les autres, consistant à étendre donc cette veille-là à l'ensemble donc des mécanismes donc existants, c'est-à-dire pour toutes les listes. Merci bien, Monsieur le Président.
Okay. Burkina Faso, please. Sorry, China.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. China would like to echo the suggestion by Morocco and several other countries of deleting paragraph A. Thank you.
Thank you. Brazil, the last.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this recommendation, we fully understand where iOS was coming from, but this recommendation was aimed at the representative list. When, with all the changes that is being proposed, I think that we are, in fact, rejecting the recommendation in the end. Brazil will actually go together with Morocco and China and suggest the deletion of this paragraph. For inscribing an element on the representative list, what the committee does is goes criteria by criteria, so it does verify all the criteria for the inscription. So I think we could reject this paragraph. Thank you.
So can we come to the consensus? We also consider that we have to follow all the chapters and all the criteria and procedures like a rule. There is no necessity to encourage someone to do it. This is simply our obligation. So if you don't mind, can we come to the consensus to delete it or what? Delete? Peru.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. La delegación peruana considera que este párrafo es importante. Cumplir con los criterios que el comité ha establecido para inscribir elementos en una y otra lista es importante. Borrar el párrafo representa decir que podemos seguir de alguna manera contradiciendo las propuestas de decisión que hacen nuestros órganos evaluadores, ambos, luego de un arduo trabajo y serio trabajo de evaluación. Nosotros creemos firmemente que el párrafo debe mantenerse porque debemos recordar que estos criterios existen y que se deben aplicar y que el comité debe aceptar lo que los órganos han evaluado. Nosotros preferimos que el párrafo quede, consideramos que no hace ningún daño decir que es necesario recordar los criterios que nosotros mismos hemos dado y que nuestros órganos aplican. Todos nuestros órganos, los dos que hasta la fecha tenemos. Gracias, señor presidente.
Okay, the proposal of PERI was supported by several countries. So I'm trying to find the solution which will be accepted by all of us. So if we will have this definition like that, ensure that inscription of elements reflects the criteria and procedures specified in chapter of the Convention, Operational Directive and so on. To delete the word more as it is written now. Can we accept it like that? Yes, please.
I would just suggest that you delete recommendation 10 because it's not addressing recommendation 10, so it's not anymore relevant.
Recommendation 10, but before, but we are now discussing this.
No, here.
Here. Here, recommendation 10. So if we will take recommendation 10, then it sounds like that. Ensure the inscription of elements reflect closely the criteria and procedures specified in chapter of the Convention Operation Directive. If so, we accept it. Thank you very much. I would like to inform you that our interpreters and all the staff is scheduled to work within the certain limits, so we did not come to the end with the agenda which we started today and hope to fulfill. But we are not too late. I hope it will take not long time tomorrow morning to go further with this paragraphs, and I count on your understanding that the schedule must be followed up very strictly. So, before coming to the end of session today, I would like to make some announcements. Before you leave the room, let me remind you that the reception is being offered by the State of Azerbaijan at Gulistan Palace at 8 p.m. Transportation is available at the entrance of the hotel. Departures at 19 p.m. and until 19:15, so somewhere. NGOs that are invited by the committee, remember that there will be a short debriefing session right now here in the room. You will have finished in time to join the Azerbaijan reception. Tomorrow morning the NGOs will gather again at 9 o'clock in room Amirjan for their regular morning meetings. Please remember that tomorrow morning the Bureau will meet at 9 o'clock in room Hovsan 1 and 2 on the 4th floor. The Vice Chairperson from Greece, Brazil, China, Burkina Faso and Egypt, including me, should please be there so where we can begin promptly. Electoral groups, I recall that you may wish to start consultations about your group's candidates for the subsidiary body, bureau and consultative body. Electoral group 1 shall choose an NGO. Electoral group 2 and 4 shall choose one expert for each group. When this issue comes up on our agenda, I do not wish to lose time for any other further consultations. Our session of the committee will start at 10 o'clock. Please be on time. Let me also remind all of those who have not yet registered to go through the procedures and get your badge in the morning. Please note that transportation to Gulistan Palace for the reception will be arranged from Marriott Hotel, not from the all hotels you are staying there. So please, at 7 o'clock, it will be in 43 minutes, we start transportation to Gülistan Palace, where we'll have a reception. Hope that you will all join the reception and enjoy the evening with us. Thank you.